What if the story you were told about the beginning is missing an entire chapter? Genesis 6:4 tells us there were giants in the earth in those days, beings who existed before the flood, yet Scripture offers only fragments. Most people assume the Bible begins with Adam and ends with Revelation in a clean, unbroken line. But history shows us ancient writings circulated among early believers that church councils later excluded, texts that asked dangerous questions about who walked the earth before Eden's gates closed. In this investigation, we will move in 3 steps. First, we will uncover what scholars have hidden about pre-Adamic civilizations. Then, we will trace the journey of Cain into a land that should not have existed. And finally, we will confront the name buried at the heart of it all, a name that changes everything. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. The manuscript in question does not appear in any official canon. It carries no endorsement from Rome, Constantinople, or Jerusalem. Scholars who mention it often do so in footnotes, using cautious language that reveals more through omission than assertion. Archaeologists have never displayed it in museums. Theologians rarely debate its contents in public forums. Yet, whispers persist across centuries, surfacing in medieval monasteries, Renaissance libraries, and modern private collections. Those whispers speak of a text that refuses to be forgotten. This manuscript bears the name of a place rather than a person: Nod, the land east of Eden. Genesis 4:16 records that Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod. One sentence, one geographic marker. Yet that single verse opens 1,000 questions. Who lived in Nod before Cain arrived? If Adam was the first man, why does Cain fear that whoever finds him will kill him? Who built the city Cain, established in a supposedly empty world? Scripture provides the question, but withholds the answer. The manuscript of Nod claims to fill that silence. Those who have encountered this text describe an experience unlike any other ancient writing. The words do not sit still on the page. Readers report that passages shift depending on the time of day, the emotional state of the reader, or the number of times the text has been opened. Some see genealogies that spiral backward before Adam. Others encounter visions of a creation that predates Genesis 1001. A few claim the manuscript speaks directly into their thoughts, bypassing the eyes entirely. But the consistency of the testimonies cannot be ignored. The manuscript's origin story is as elusive as its content. No single discovery event marks its entrance into history. Instead, it appears in fragments across different eras. A Byzantine monk references it in a letter from 1074. A Jewish mystic in 13th century Spain describes a vision involving its passages. A Protestant reformer in 1520s Germany warns against it in a now-lost treatise. An Enlightenment philosopher in France alludes to it in coded memoirs. Each reference is brief, veiled, and often accompanied by expressions of fear or awe. None of these sources provide the full text. They only confirm that something existed, something powerful enough to warrant secrecy. Modern attempts to locate the manuscript have met with strange obstacles. Researchers who get close to a lead often experience sudden career shifts, health crises, or unexplained losses of funding. Libraries that once claimed to house fragments now report those sections missing or misfiled. Digital archives suffer corruption when certain search terms are entered. Skeptics attribute these patterns to coincidence or conspiracy theory. Believers see a protective mechanism at work, as if the manuscript itself determines who may approach and who must be turned away. The line between paranoia and pattern recognition grows thin in these investigations. What makes this manuscript different from other apocryphal texts is its refusal to conform to genre. It is not quite prophecy, not quite history, not quite wisdom literature. It blends all three while belonging to none. The Book of Enoch tells of the Watchers. The Book of Jubilees expands on Genesis chronology. The Gospel of Thomas records hidden sayings. Each of these fits within a recognizable category. The Manuscript of Nod defies categorization. It operates by its own logic, following a structure that only becomes apparent after repeated engagement. First-time readers often report confusion. Those who return find coherence emerging slowly, as if the text requires initiation before it will yield meaning. The central claim of the manuscript is both simple and shattering. It asserts that Eden was not the beginning. Before the garden, before Adam's creation, there existed another world, another humanity, another covenant. This prior creation was not destroyed but displaced, pushed to the margins of reality when the Genesis account began. The land of Nod, according to this text, is not merely a geographic location east of Eden. It is a threshold between the visible world and the hidden one, a place where the old creation still breathes beneath the surface of the new. Cain did not wander into an empty wasteland. He walked into a kingdom already ancient when he arrived. If this claim holds even a fragment of truth, the implications cascade outward in every direction. It means the God of Genesis did not create from nothing but from something already in motion. It means humanity's origins are older and stranger than Sunday school lessons suggest. It means the biblical narrative, while true, may not be complete. And it means that somewhere, hidden in the folds of history and scripture, lies a story we were never meant to forget, but somehow did. The Manuscript of Nod, whether authentic revelation or elaborate fabrication, forces anyone who encounters it to ask one dangerous question: what if we have been reading the story from the middle, mistaking chapter 2 for chapter 1? Subscribe to this channel for deeper investigations into biblical mysteries. Like this video if these questions stir something in you. Comment below with your thoughts on pre-Adamic civilizations. Share this with anyone who hungers for truth beyond tradition. We are just beginning to peel back the layers. The next chapter will take us further into the shadowed history that Scripture hints at but never fully reveals. And what we discover there will challenge everything you thought you knew about the beginning. Chapter 2, Before Eden, Before Adam. Genesis 1 Par 1 opens with creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Theologians have debated the precise meaning of beginning for millennia. Does it mean the absolute start of all things, or the start of this particular phase of existence? The Hebrew word bereshit carries layers of meaning that English translation flattened. It can mean in the beginning or in a beginning. That subtle difference matters. One suggests a singular origin point. The other allows for multiple commencements, multiple creations, multiple worlds unfolding across time. The Manuscript of Nod insists on the latter interpretation. It claims Genesis 1:1 marks the beginning of our current world, not the first world. Ancient Jewish mysticism contains whispers of this idea. The Kabbalistic tradition speaks of shattered worlds that preceded ours, realms that God created and then dissolved because they could not sustain His presence. The Zohar, a foundational text of Jewish mysticism, references the kings of Edom, who reigned and died before Adam was formed. These kings ruled over worlds that existed in potential but failed in execution. Christian theologians largely dismissed these concepts as speculation, but the Manuscript of Nod treats them as historical fact, not metaphysical theory. It provides names, dates, and descriptions of these prior attempts at creation. It describes them as rehearsals before the final performance, prototypes before the finished product. The manuscript describes the first creation as a world of pure spirit, beings without flesh, intelligence without form. These entities existed in direct communion with the divine presence, needing no mediator, no law, no structure. They were thought given consciousness, intention given agency. But this creation collapsed under its own weight. Without boundaries, the beings lost definition. Without limitation, they lost identity. They blurred into each other, and eventually into nothing. The manuscript calls this the first silence, a dissolution so complete that even memory of it nearly vanished. Only traces remained, echoes that would resurface in later myths about chaos before order. The second creation introduced matter. God shaped substance, giving form to the formless void. But this iteration had a different problem. Matter without spirit became inert, lifeless, a gallery of sculptures with no animator. The manuscript describes vast landscapes of perfect geometry, crystalline structures that reflected light but generated no warmth. Beauty existed, but no one existed to appreciate it. This world was a museum with no visitors, a symphony with no audience. It could not sustain itself because it lacked the interior spark that transforms existence into life. The manuscript calls this the beautiful death, a creation that was flawless and utterly empty. Scholars who study ancient Near Eastern texts see echoes of this in the Tov Bohu, the formless void that Genesis 1:2 describes hovering over the waters before God's Spirit moved. The third creation attempted to balance spirit and matter. Beings were given both consciousness and form, intelligence and bodies. They walked on solid ground but could perceive realms beyond the physical. They were the first to experience time as a sequence of moments rather than an eternal now. They built, they learned, they grew. For a time this creation thrived. The manuscript names this era the Age of the Watchers, and it describes a civilization of immense sophistication. These beings mastered technologies that blended the physical and the spiritual, constructing cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They spoke languages that shaped reality, words that could summon or dissolve matter. They lived for vast spans of time, accumulating knowledge across centuries. But this creation also failed, though not through collapse. It failed through ambition. The Watchers sought to transcend the boundaries placed upon them. They wanted not just to exist within creation, but to create as God creates. They experimented with forbidden knowledge, attempting to rewrite the laws that governed their existence. The manuscript describes great towers built to pierce the barrier between worlds, rituals designed to grant them access to the divine throne itself. This was not rebellion born of hatred, but of desire, a hunger to become more than what they were made to be. And that hunger brought judgment. The judgment was not destruction, but displacement. God did not annihilate the third creation. Instead, he folded it away, tucking it into the margins of reality. The manuscript describes this as a failing, a separation that left the third creation still existing but no longer accessible from the primary plane of reality. The Watchers and their world were pushed to the edge, still present but hidden, still alive but invisible. This hidden realm became known by many names across many cultures. Some called it the underworld, others named it the realm of shadows. The manuscript calls it Nod, the first and oldest of the hidden kingdoms, and it asserts that when Genesis begins with "in the beginning," it is describing the fourth creation, the one we inhabit now, built atop the ruins and beside the remnants of what came before. This framework recontextualizes everything that follows in Scripture. Adam is not the first human, but the first human of the fourth creation. Eden is not the first paradise, but a new garden planted in a world still haunted by older gardens. The tree of knowledge is not the first forbidden thing, but the latest in a long line of boundaries designed to prevent the new creation from repeating the mistakes of the old. And when Cain is cast out, he is not wandering into emptiness. He is crossing the veil into Nod, into the remnant of the third creation, into a land where beings from the previous age still dwell in their folded-away kingdom. The manuscript claims Cain did not discover Nod. Nod discovered him. This idea disturbs Orthodox theology because it suggests creation is not a singular event, but a process, a series of divine experiments. It implies that God learned from previous attempts, refining his approach with each iteration. Traditional doctrine holds that God is omniscient and omniscient, needing no trial and error. But the manuscript presents a different image, one where creation is not a declaration but a conversation, not a command, but a collaboration between divine intent and creaturely response. This does not diminish God's sovereignty in the manuscript's telling. It magnifies his patience, his willingness to continue creating even when earlier creations fall short. It portrays a God who does not give up on the project of existence, who keeps trying until he achieves a creation that can sustain relationship with him. If you have made it this far, you are already thinking differently about Genesis. Comment below with your interpretation of the multiple creations. Like this video if the idea of hidden worlds intrigues you. Share this with fellow seekers who are ready to question assumptions. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will step into Nod itself and meet the beings Cain encountered when he crossed the threshold. We are moving deeper into the mystery, and there is no turning back. Chapter 3, The Land East of Eden. Genesis 4016 is one of the Bible's most haunting verses. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. 15 words. A lifetime of exile compressed into a single sentence. Traditional interpretation treats Nod as a wilderness, a place of wandering where Cain lived in isolation until he eventually built a city. The Hebrew word Nod comes from the root meaning to wander, reinforcing this reading. But the manuscript of Nod challenges this interpretation. It claims the land was not named for wandering, but for something far older, a name that existed before Cain arrived, a name that meant something else entirely in the language of the Watchers. The manuscript describes Nod as a threshold, a place where the veil between the fourth creation and the third creation grew thin. Geographically, it was east of Eden, but that direction carried symbolic weight. In ancient Near Eastern cosmology, east often represented the origin point, the direction of the rising sun, the place where divine and earthly realms intersected. To go east was not merely to travel in a cardinal direction. It was to move toward the edge of the known world, toward the boundary between order and chaos. Cain's journey east, then, was not random exile. It was a movement toward the liminal space where the old creation still breathed beneath the surface of the new. The manuscript claims that Nod existed as a physical location in the world of the fourth creation, but it also extended into dimensions beyond the physical. A person standing in Nod could perceive both the material landscape and, under certain conditions, the hidden structures of the third creation. It was a place of double vision, where past and present overlapped. Travelers in Nod reported seeing ruins that were not there when they looked away and then back. They heard languages they did not recognize yet somehow understood. They felt presences watching them from just beyond the edge of sight. Nod was not merely a land, it was a wound in reality, a place where the veiling was incomplete, where the separation between creations remained porous. Before Cain arrived, Nod was already inhabited. The manuscript is explicit on this point. The beings who dwelt there were remnants of the third creation, watchers who had been folded away when the fourth creation began. They had not been destroyed in the judgment. They had been displaced, exiled from the primary plane of existence but not annihilated. In Nod, they continued their existence, building cities that shimmered at the edge of perception, governing themselves according to laws older than the Torah, speaking in tongues that predated Hebrew and Sumerian alike. These were not demons in the manuscript's telling. They were not malevolent by nature. They were simply other beings who belonged to a previous chapter of existence and now found themselves living in the margins of a new story. When Cain entered Nod, he carried the mark God had placed on him. Genesis 4:15 states that the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. Who was this anyone in a world supposedly populated only by Adam, Eve, and their children? Commentators have offered various explanations. Some suggest Cain feared future descendants of Adam. Others propose wild animals. But the manuscript of Nod offers a different answer. Cain feared the inhabitants of Nod, the Watchers who still dwelt in the hidden places of the earth. The mark was not just a sign of shame. It was protection, a seal that identified Cain as under divine protection even in his exile, a sign that the beings of Nod must not harm him. The manuscript describes Cain's first encounter with the inhabitants of Nod as a moment of mutual shock. The Watchers had not seen a being of the fourth creation up close before. They knew the new world had begun, but they had not expected one of its inhabitants to cross into their realm. Cain, for his part, had never imagined that other intelligent beings existed beyond his immediate family. The manuscript records their first exchange, though not in direct dialogue. It describes a communication that happened through gesture, intention, and some form of telepathic resonance. Cain learned that he was not alone in his exile. The Watchers had also been cast out, though their exile was far older and far deeper than his. Over time, a relationship developed between Cain and the Watchers. The manuscript describes it as a pact, an alliance born of mutual recognition. Both Cain and the Watchers were outcasts. Both carried the weight of judgment. Both had been separated from the divine presence in different ways. The Watchers saw in Cain an opportunity to reconnect with the new creation, to influence its development in ways they could not do from their hidden realm. Cain saw in the Watchers a source of knowledge and power that his father Adam had been denied. The tree of knowledge had been forbidden to Adam, but in Nod, knowledge flowed freely. The Watchers had no restrictions on what they could teach, and Cain proved an eager student. The city Cain built in Nod, which he named after his son Enoch, was not merely a human settlement. According to the manuscript, it was a hybrid creation, a place where the architecture of the fourth creation and the third creation merged. The Watchers taught Cain techniques for constructing buildings that could exist simultaneously in multiple states of reality. These structures appeared as simple dwellings to ordinary eyes, but revealed hidden dimensions to those who knew how to look. The city of Enoch became a center of learning, a place where the descendants of Cain studied the old ways of the Watchers. They learned metallurgy from beings who had shaped matter with thought. They learned music from those who had composed harmonies that reordered reality. They learned language from masters of the first tongue, the vibrational dialect that preceded all human speech. But this knowledge came with a cost. The more Cain's descendants learned from the Watchers, the more they changed. They began to exhibit traits that other descendants of Adam would later find disturbing. They lived longer than they should. They demonstrated abilities that seemed supernatural. They spoke of visions and dreams that ordinary humans could not access. They carried within them a restlessness, a hunger for something beyond the boundaries of the fourth creation. The manuscript describes this as the inheritance of Nod, a spiritual mark passed down through Cain's line. It was not a curse in the traditional sense. It was a mingling, a blending of the old creation and the new, a fusion that made Cain's descendants forever different from the rest of humanity. Like this video, if the idea of a hybrid civilization challenges your understanding, comment with your thoughts on the relationship between Cain and the Watchers. Share this with anyone who questions the gaps in biblical genealogy. Subscribe to journey further into the hidden history. The next chapter will introduce us to the council that ruled Nod before Cain arrived, and their story will reveal even more about the nature of reality itself. Chapter 4. Cain's Journey into Nod. Genesis 4017 presents a theological puzzle. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. The question that haunts every careful reader appears immediately. Where did Cain's wife come from? If only Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel existed at this point in the narrative, and Abel was dead, then who did Cain marry? Traditional answers suggest he married a sister, a daughter of Adam and Eve, not mentioned by name. But this explanation feels incomplete. The text gives no indication of sisters existing at this point. It simply states that Cain knew his wife, as if her presence required no explanation, as if she was already there when he arrived in Nod. The manuscript of Nod offers a more provocative answer. Cain's wife was not a daughter of Adam. She was a daughter of Nod, a woman from the remnant population of the third creation. The manuscript describes her as a descendant of the Watchers, a being who existed at the intersection of the spiritual and the physical. Her name, according to the manuscript, was Awan, though other traditions call her by different names. She was not entirely human in the way Cain was human. She carried genetic and spiritual markers from the previous creation. When Cain and Awan came together, their union was not merely a marriage. It was a merger of two creations, the old and the new, producing offspring who would carry traits from both worlds. The manuscript describes Cain's arrival in Nod as both exile and initiation. He came as a fugitive, marked by God, carrying the guilt of his brother's blood. But the Watchers of Nod did not see him as a criminal. They saw him as a bridge, the first being of the new creation to cross into their hidden realm. They observed him carefully in those early days, watching how he moved, how he spoke, how he responded to the strange landscape of their veiled world. The manuscript records that Cain spent his first weeks in Nod in a state of confusion, seeing structures that appeared and disappeared, hearing voices that seemed to come from inside his own mind, experiencing time in ways that defied the linear sequence he had known in Eden. Awan was sent to him. The manuscript is clear on this point. She did not stumble upon Cain by accident. The Council of Nod, the ruling body of the Watchers in that region, decided that contact should be made. Awan was chosen because she possessed a unique trait among her people. She could exist fully in both the hidden realm of the third creation and the material realm of the fourth creation. She could bridge the gap. When she approached Cain, he saw her as a woman, beautiful and strange, speaking in a language he did not know, yet somehow understood. She saw him as a curiosity, a creature from the new world, raw and unformed, but carrying within him the potential for something the Watchers had lost. Their first conversations, as described in the manuscript, were not romantic. They were interrogations. Awan asked Cain about Eden, about the God who created him, about the rules that governed his world. Cain asked her about Nod, about the beings who dwelt there, about the knowledge they possessed. She told him stories of the third creation, of cities that rose and fell across millennia, of technologies that bent reality to the will of their creators, of the great ambition that led to the judgment and the veiling. He told her of the garden, of the tree, of his parents' fall, of his own crime and exile. In these exchanges, something shifted. Cain realized he was not the first to be cast out. Awan realized that the new creation was not as perfect as the Watchers had assumed. The manuscript describes their union as a ritual overseen by the Council of Nod. It was not simply a personal choice. It was a political and metaphysical act, a deliberate attempt to blend the old creation with the new. The council believed that if they could merge their lineage with Cain's, they could re-enter the story of the fourth creation. They could bypass the veiling, not by breaking it, but by flowing through it via bloodline. Cain, for his part, saw the union as survival. He needed allies in this strange land. He needed knowledge to thrive, and Awan offered both. When their son Enoch was born, he became the first hybrid, the first being to carry the legacy of both the third and fourth creations within his very cells. Enoch, Cain's son, is not to be confused with Enoch, the son of Jared, who walked with God and was taken. The two Enochs exist in different genealogical lines and represent different destinies. Cain's Enoch, according to the manuscript, inherited his mother's ability to perceive the hidden layers of reality. From infancy, he saw things others could not see. He spoke in the first tongue before he learned the language of his father. He grew rapidly, maturing in ways that alarmed even the Watchers. By the time he reached what would have been adolescence, he possessed knowledge that elder Watchers had taken centuries to acquire. The manuscript describes him as the first true citizen of Nod, a being who belonged fully to neither the old creation nor the new, but existed as a synthesis of both. Cain built the city and named it after Enoch, not merely as a father honoring a son, but as a founder acknowledging the future. The city was Enoch's in a deeper sense. It was designed for beings like him, hybrids who could navigate multiple realities, who could speak multiple languages, who could access the knowledge of the Watchers while still walking in the material world. The manuscript describes the architecture of the city of Enoch as impossible. Structures that defied gravity, buildings that were larger on the inside than the outside, streets that led to places that should not exist within three-dimensional space. Ordinary humans from the line of Seth, Adam's third son, could not enter this city. They would see only ruins or empty land. But for the descendants of Cain, the city was fully real, a shining metropolis at the edge of reality. The knowledge Cain acquired in Nod flowed through his descendants. Genesis 4 gives us a genealogy that includes several notable figures. Jabal was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Jabal was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. Tubal was the center of Enin, bronze and iron. The biblical text presents these as cultural achievements, the origins of pastoral life, music, and metallurgy, but the manuscript of Nod claims these were not human innovations. They were teachings from the Watchers, knowledge passed down through Awan's line, fragments of the third creation's technology and wisdom adapted for the fourth creation's context. The descendants of Cain became culture bearers, not through ingenuity alone, but through inheritance, through the pact made between their forefather and the hidden kingdom of Nod. Yet the manuscript also warns that this knowledge came with corruption. The more the line of Cain integrated with the Watchers, the more they drifted from the ways of the fourth creation. They began to see themselves as superior to other humans, as a chosen line with access to secrets denied to the descendants of Seth. Pride grew among them. They practiced rituals that blurred the boundary between worship and manipulation, calling upon powers that predated the God of Adam. They sought not to serve the Creator, but to become creators themselves, echoing the ambition that had doomed the third creation. And the manuscript suggests that this corruption, this overreach, ultimately brought the flood, a judgment not merely on human wickedness, but on the resurgence of the old creation's ambition within the new creation's timeline. Comment below if you see parallels between Cain's descendants and the Nephilim. Like this video if the idea of hybrid bloodlines reframes Genesis for you. Share with anyone who has ever wondered where Cain's wife came from. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will meet the council that ruled Nod and learn about the language that shapes reality itself. We are entering the deep places now, and the deeper we go, the stranger the story becomes. Chapter 5. The Inhabitants Before the Exile. The manuscript of Nod does not treat the Watchers as a monolithic group. It distinguishes between different orders, different roles, different destinies within the third creation. The beings Cain encountered in Nod were not the same as the Watchers mentioned in the Book of Enoch, though the manuscript acknowledges a connection. In Enoch's account, 200 Watchers descended to Mount Hermon, took human wives, and produced the Nephilim. The manuscript of Nod describes those Watchers as rebels, a later faction who attempted to infiltrate the fourth creation directly. But the Watchers of Nod were different. They had been displaced before the fourth creation even began. They had been part of the original judgment, exiled not for rebellion, but for ambition, not for defiance, but for overreach. The manuscript describes the hierarchy of Nod. At the top was the Council of Seven, beings who had held authority in the third creation and continued to govern in exile. These were not angels in the biblical sense. They were not servants of God created to worship. They were autonomous intelligences, entities who had been given creative authority within their own realm. The manuscript names them, though the names do not translate well into human language. Rendered phonetically, they sound like Azel, Naphael, Gorav, Tilman, Sivan, Korim, and Zael. Each governed a different aspect of Nod's existence. Azel oversaw structure and form. Naphael managed time and memory. Gorav handled energy and transformation. The others held similar domains. Together, they maintained the stability of Nod, ensuring that their hidden realm did not collapse into chaos. Beneath the Council of Seven were the speakers, beings who had mastered the first tongue, the language of creation that the Watchers had used before the fourth creation began. The manuscript describes this language not as words, but as vibrations, frequencies that interacted directly with the fabric of reality. A speaker could articulate a specific sound, and matter would respond, rearranging itself according to the pattern encoded in the vibration. They could build structures without tools, heal injuries without medicine, travel distances without walking. The speakers were scholars and engineers, preserving the knowledge of the third creation and adapting it to the conditions of exile. When Cain arrived, it was the speakers who taught him the rudiments of this language. Though he never mastered it fully, only his descendants, the hybrids, would eventually learn to speak it fluently. The lowest order in Nod's hierarchy was the remnants, beings who had lost much of their original power in the veiling. They retained consciousness and form but could no longer manipulate reality as they once had. The remnants lived simple lives in Nod, tending to tasks that sustained the community, maintaining the structures the speakers created, assisting the council in administrative matters. They were the majority population in Nod, and they carried the deepest sorrow. They remembered what they had been and saw clearly what they had become. The manuscript described them as haunted by nostalgia, always looking back to the glory of the third creation before the judgment. When they saw Cain, some felt hope that connection with the new creation might restore what they had lost. Others felt bitterness, seeing him as a representative of the world that had replaced them. Nod itself was not a single city but a region, a network of settlements scattered across the threshold space. The manuscript describes these settlements as nodes in a larger pattern, each one anchoring a portion of the veiling, keeping the third creation's remnants stable within their hidden dimension. The largest settlement was called Xyrel, the city where the Council of Seven held their assemblies. It stood at the center of Nod, both geographically and metaphysically. Roads radiated outward from Xyrel to the other settlements, but these were not ordinary roads. Walking them meant transitioning between layers of reality. A traveler might step onto a road in the material world and arrive in a place that existed half in the physical and half in the spiritual. Time moved differently on these roads. A journey that seemed to take hours might span days in the outside world, or vice versa. The architecture of Nod reflected the skills of the speakers. Buildings in Nod were grown rather than constructed, shaped from living stone that responded to the first tongue. The manuscript describes towers that spiraled upward in impossible curves, structures that hovered above the ground without visible support, homes that changed shape according to the needs of their inhabitants. Light in Nod did not come from the sun, because Nod existed partially outside the solar system's reach. Instead, light was generated by crystalline formations embedded in the buildings and the landscape. Stones that absorbed energy from unseen sources and emitted a soft, constant glow. Visitors from the fourth creation who glimpsed Nod described it as dreamlike, a city made of glass and shadow, beautiful and unsettling in equal measure. The inhabitants of Nod did not reproduce as humans do. The manuscript is explicit on this point. The Watchers of the third creation had been created, not born. They did not have biological life cycles in the way beings of the fourth creation did. They did not age, did not sicken, did not die naturally. Their numbers remained stable across millennia. When one of them was destroyed, either through violence or through the dissolution that sometimes occurred when a being lost cohesion, that loss was permanent. No new Watchers were created after the third creation ended. The Council of Seven had recognized this as their greatest vulnerability. They were a finite population with no means of replenishment. That was why the pact with Cain mattered so much. Through Cain's descendants, they could propagate, not as pure Watchers, but as hybrids who carried their knowledge and abilities into future generations. The culture of Nod was built around memory and preservation. The Watchers knew they were the last of their kind. They knew the third creation would eventually fade entirely as they faded. So they focused on recording everything they had been, everything they had known, everything they had built. The manuscript describes vast libraries in Nod, repositories of knowledge inscribed not on scrolls or tablets, but on crystalline matrices that stored information in multi-dimensional formats. A single crystal might contain the entire history of a civilization, the complete works of 1,000 scholars, the technical specifications for constructing a city that existed in 5 dimensions simultaneously. These libraries were guarded jealously. Only the council and the speakers had full access. But fragments of this knowledge were shared with Cain and his descendants as part of the pact. Nod was not a paradise. The manuscript does not romanticize the existence of the Watchers in exile. It describes their lives as marked by longing and frustration. They could see the fourth creation continuing without them. They could perceive the unfolding of history, the rise of new civilizations, the spread of Adam's descendants across the earth. But they could not participate. They were ghosts haunting the margins, observers rather than actors. The arrival of Cain broke that isolation. For the first time since the veiling, they had a way to influence the new creation's trajectory. They had a partner, an ally, a bridge back to the world they had lost. And they poured everything they had into that partnership, teaching Cain and his descendants everything they could, hoping that through this line, the memory of the third creation would survive. But the manuscript also records dissent within Nod. Not all Watchers supported the pact with Cain. Some argue that it was a violation of the judgment, an attempt to circumvent the boundaries God had placed upon them. They feared that blending with the fourth creation would provoke further judgment, not just on Nod, but on the entire world. A faction within the Council of Seven opposed Owen's union with Cain. They were overruled, but the division remained. The manuscript hints that this internal conflict contributed to later events, to the eventual fracturing of Nod's unity, to decisions that would have catastrophic consequences in the centuries to come. But those consequences unfold later in the narrative. For now, in the early days of Cain's sojourn, Nod stood united, a hidden kingdom opening its doors to a refugee from the New World. Share this video if the idea of pre-Adamic civilizations fascinates you. Like if you are rethinking the Watchers after this chapter. Comment below with your questions about the Council of Seven. Subscribe to continue this journey into the forgotten history that Scripture only hints at. The next chapter will take us into the Council's inner workings and reveal the language that the speakers used to shape reality itself. We are moving deeper, and the implications grow more profound with every step. Chapter 6. The Council of the First Tongue Language in the Biblical Tradition is Power. Genesis 11 records the Tower of Babel, where humanity spoke one language and God confused their tongues to halt their ambition. Proverbs 18:21 states that death and life are in the power of the tongue. John 1:1 declares that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Scripture consistently treats language not as a tool for communication alone, but as a force that shapes reality. The manuscript of Nod takes this principle further. It claims that before Hebrew, before Sumerian, before any human language existed, there was the first tongue, the language spoken by the Watchers in the third creation, a language that did not describe reality but commanded it. The first tongue was not made of words in the conventional sense. The manuscript describes it as a system of vibrations, each frequency corresponding to a specific aspect of existence. Matter had its frequency, energy had its frequency. Time, space, thought, emotion, each had distinct vibrational signatures. A speaker who mastered the first tongue could produce the correct frequency and cause a corresponding change in reality. To speak the frequency of stone was to command stone to form, to dissolve, to reshape itself. To speak the frequency of light was to summon illumination or cast shadow. The first tongue was not learned through grammar and vocabulary. It was learned through attunement, through training the body and mind to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation. The Council of Seven were the supreme masters of the first tongue. The manuscript describes their gatherings as symphonies of creation, sessions where they would speak together in harmonic patterns that maintained the structure of Nod itself. The hidden realm did not sustain itself naturally. It required constant reinforcement, a continual speaking of the frequencies that kept the veiling stable. If the council ever fell silent, Nod would begin to unravel, collapsing back into the chaos from which it had been shaped. This was their burden and their purpose. They were not rulers in the sense of kings issuing decrees. They were anchors, beings whose very speech held their world together. Arzel, the first of the seven, governed structure and form. His frequency was deep and resonant, a sound that felt more like pressure than noise. When he spoke, the air thickened and matter responded by solidifying. The manuscript records that Arzel designed the original layout of Nod, speaking its geography into existence after the veiling. He was the architect of the hidden realm, the one who ensured that the Watchers had a place to dwell when they were displaced from the primary plane. His personality, as the manuscript describes it, was stern and unyielding. He believed in order above all else, in maintaining boundaries, in preserving what remained. He was the one who most strongly opposed the pact with Cain, fearing it would destabilize Nod's carefully maintained structure. Naphael governed time and memory. Her frequency was high and sharp, a sound that seemed to cut through other sounds. Time in Nod did not flow the same way it did in the fourth creation. The manuscript describes it as layered, with past, present, and future existing simultaneously in some locations. Raphael's role was to manage these layers, ensuring that the Watchers could navigate their own history without becoming lost in temporal loops. She also maintained the collective memory of Nod, preserving the knowledge of the third creation in crystalline archives that existed outside normal time. She was the one who saw the most potential in the pact with Cain. She recognized that memory could be passed through bloodline, that the hybrids could carry the history of the third creation forward into the fourth creation's future. Gorath handled energy and transformation. His frequency was rhythmic and pulsing, a sound that made the heart beat faster. Energy in the third creation had been harnessed directly, without the need for fire or tools. Gorath's mastery allowed the Watchers to draw power from the ambient field of reality itself, converting potential into motion, thought into action. The manuscript describes him as restless and creative, always experimenting with new forms, new combinations, new ways of manifesting energy. He was fascinated by Cain, seeing him as raw material that could be shaped, transformed, elevated. Gorath was Awan's mentor, the one who trained her to bridge the realms, and he took personal interest in the education of Cain's descendants. The other four members of the council were described in less detail, but the manuscript names their domains. Tillman governed connection and relationship, the bonds that held beings together in community. Sivan managed perception and awareness, the ways in which consciousness interacted with the world. Korim oversaw balance and justice, ensuring that the laws of Nod were maintained. Xyle handled dissolution and renewal, the necessary endings that made space the new beginnings. Together, the seven represented a complete system of governance, each one managing a dimension of existence that allowed Nod to function despite its exile. The speakers who served beneath the council were trained in specific subsets of the first tongue. No one except the seven could master the full language. The manuscript explains that speaking the full range of frequencies required a form of consciousness that humans and even most Watchers did not possess. The seven had been shaped for this purpose, designed in the third creation to be the custodians of reality's fabric. The speakers learned enough to perform specific tasks. A speaker trained in the frequency of stone could construct buildings but could not manipulate time. A speaker trained in the frequency of light could illuminate or conceal but could not transform energy. Specialization was necessary because attempting to speak beyond one's capacity led to dissonance, a breakdown in the speaker's own coherence. When Cain first heard the first tongue, the manuscript records that he fell to his knees in awe and terror. The sound bypassed his ears and resonated in his bones, in his blood, in the core of his being. He understood instinctively that he was hearing something not meant for beings of the fourth creation, a language that predated his own existence. Awan spent months teaching him the most basic frequencies, the ones that would allow him to navigate Nod without becoming lost or dissolving. He never progressed beyond the fundamentals. His throat could not produce the sounds correctly. His mind could not hold the patterns long enough to use them effectively. But his children, the hybrids, inherited a capacity he lacked. They could learn the first tongue, not at the level of the seven, but enough to wield significant power. The manuscript describes the first tongue as dangerous to those unprepared for it. Speaking a frequency incorrectly could cause unintended consequences, warping reality in destructive ways. A mistaken frequency could cause a building to collapse, a person to dissolve, a section of Nod to destabilize. Training in the first tongue took decades, sometimes centuries of careful practice under the supervision of a master speaker. Mistakes were not merely errors, they were catastrophes. The manuscript records incidents where novice speakers attempted to use the language prematurely and caused entire regions of Nod to flicker in and out of existence, displacing hundreds of watchers into undefined space where they were lost forever. The Seven enforced strict regulations on who could study the language and under what conditions. But despite the dangers, the first tongue was the greatest gift Nod could offer to Cain's line. It was the key to everything the Watchers had accomplished. It was the foundation of their civilization, the source of their power, the means by which they had shaped the third creation before the judgment. The manuscript suggests that fragments of the first tongue survived into human history, surfacing in various mystical traditions. The Kabbalistic practice of using divine names to invoke power, the Hindu use of mantras to alter consciousness, the shamanic use of chants to interact with spirits, all of these, according to the manuscript, were echoes of the first tongue, distorted and incomplete, but still carrying traces of the original vibrational language. And the descendants of Cain, having learned directly from the speakers, carried this knowledge in ways no other human lineage could. The manuscript warns that the first tongue still exists. It is not a dead language. It is woven into the structure of reality itself, always present, always active, waiting for those who can attune themselves to its frequencies. The manuscript claims that certain individuals in every generation stumble upon fragments of the first tongue, often without knowing what they have found. They speak words or sounds that produce inexplicable effects. They experience moments of synchronicity where intention and reality align perfectly. They glimpse, for just a moment, the way the Watchers once shaped the world. And in those moments, the manuscript suggests the boundary between the fourth creation and the third creation grows thin, and Nod bleeds through into our world once more. Like this video if the concept of a vibrational language reshapes your understanding of scripture. Comment below if you have ever experienced a moment where words seemed to alter reality. Share with anyone studying the power of language in mystical traditions. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will explore the Watcher's greatest secret, the implantation of memory, and how it transformed Cain's descendants forever. The deeper we go, the more we realize how much has been hidden. Chapter 7. The Watchers and the implanted memory in biblical thought is sacred. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 commands Israel to remember God's words, to teach them diligently to their children, to speak of them at home and on the road. The Passover is a ritual of memory, a commanded act of remembrance. Jesus at the Last Supper says, "Do this in remembrance of me." Memory is how identity is formed, how history is preserved, how covenant is maintained. But the manuscript of Nod introduces a darker dimension to memory. It describes a practice the Watchers developed in the third creation, a way of transferring memory from one being to another, not through teaching but through direct implantation. And this practice, the manuscript claims, was used extensively on Cain's descendants. The implantation of memory was not originally designed for manipulation. The manuscript describes it as a preservation technique, developed when the Watchers realized their creation was failing. They knew judgment was coming. They knew they would be displaced. So they sought a way to carry their knowledge forward, to ensure that even if their civilization fell, the accumulated wisdom of millennia would not be lost. They discovered that memory is not merely stored in the mind. It is encoded in the structure of consciousness itself, in patterns that can be extracted, preserved, and reimplanted into a different mind. The process required mastery of the first tongue, specifically the frequencies that governed thought and awareness. But once perfected, it allowed the Watchers to transfer entire lifetimes of experience from one being to another in moments. When the veiling occurred and the Watchers were exiled to Nod, they brought this technology with them. They used it among themselves to train new speakers more rapidly, to pass down the knowledge of the Council without requiring centuries of study. But the arrival of Cain opened a new possibility. The Watchers realized they could implant their memories into beings of the fourth creation, into the hybrids born from the union of Cain's line and the daughters of Nod. These children, half human and half Watcher, were neurologically capable of receiving the implants in ways that pure humans were not, and so the practice began. The descendants of Cain from childhood received memories that were not their own. The manuscript describes the experience from the perspective of a recipient. A child of Cain's line, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, would be brought before a speaker. The speaker would place hands on the child's head and begin to hum in the first tongue, a low vibration that made the air tremble. The child would feel a sensation like falling, though the body remained still, and then the memories would come, flooding into consciousness like water breaking through a dam. The child would suddenly remember things that had never happened to them. They would remember walking through cities of the third creation. They would remember conversations with beings long dissolved. They would remember techniques for shaping matter, formulas for bending time, the layout of libraries that no longer existed. The implanted memories did not replace the child's own memories. They layered over them, creating a dual consciousness. This practice produced extraordinary results. Children of Cain's line grew into adults with knowledge that spanned ages. They could draw upon techniques and wisdom that predated humanity. They could speak languages they had never been taught. They could recognize patterns in nature and society that others could not see. They became, in effect, living repositories of the third creation's legacy. But the manuscript also records the psychological cost. Many of the recipients struggled to distinguish their own experiences from the implanted ones. They suffered from confusion about their identities, not knowing where their selfhood ended and the memories of the Watchers began. Some descended into madness, unable to bear the weight of multiple lifetimes pressing into a single mind. The Council of Seven debated the ethics of this practice. Exile opposed it on principle, arguing that it violated the boundaries between the creations. Raphael defended it, insisting that memory was meant to be shared, that the preservation of knowledge justified the cost. Gorath saw it purely as a practical tool, neither moral nor immoral, simply effective. The debate never reached resolution. The practice continued, but with some restrictions. Only certain children were chosen, those who showed early signs of mental resilience. Only specific memories were implanted, carefully curated to avoid the most traumatic or destabilizing experiences of the Watchers, and the recipients were monitored throughout their lives, with speakers available to help them integrate the foreign memories. The manuscript claims that implanted memory explains many of the extraordinary achievements attributed to Cain's descendants in Genesis 4. Jubal, the father of all who play the harp and flute, did not invent music through trial and error. He remembered the harmonic structures used by the Watchers to shape reality. Jubal Cain, the instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, did not discover metallurgy through experimentation. He remembered the techniques the speakers had used to manipulate the frequencies of metal. These were not acts of genius, they were acts of remembering, accessing knowledge that had been placed into their minds by the Watchers of Nod. The manuscript reframes cultural innovation as cultural transmission, a downloading of ancient knowledge into new vessels. But the implantation of memory was not limited to skills and techniques. The manuscript describes deeper implants, memories that carried emotional and spiritual content. Some descendants of Cain received memories of the third creation's glory, the days before the judgment when the Watchers ruled a thriving civilization. These memories instilled a sense of nostalgia and longing, a desire to restore what had been lost. Others received memories of the judgment itself, the moment when the veiling occurred and the third creation was folded away. These memories brought fear and urgency, a drive to avoid repeating the mistakes that had led to exile. The implanted memories shaped not just what Cain's descendants knew, but how they felt, what they desired, what they feared. The manuscript also suggests that the practice spread beyond Nod. Some descendants of Cain, equipped with implanted memories and trained in fragments of the first tongue, left Nod and entered the wider world of the fourth creation. They intermarried with the line of Seth, Adam's third son, through whom the biblical genealogy continues to Noah. This mixing introduced Watcher knowledge into the broader human population, though in diluted and fragmented forms. The manuscript claims that every human lineage, including the line that leads to Abraham, carries traces of these implanted memories. They surface in dreams, in moments of intuition, in sudden flashes of insight that seem to come from nowhere. They are the whispers of the third creation, still echoing through the descendants of Adam. This concept has profound theological implications. If memory can be implanted, then personal identity becomes less stable. Who you are is not just a product of your experiences, but also of the experiences placed into you by others. The manuscript suggests that the divine act of creation might itself involve a form of memory implantation, that when God creates a being, he encodes within it memories of himself, echoes of the divine consciousness that allow the creature to recognize its creator. This reframes the image of God not as a static likeness, but as a shared memory, a fragment of divine awareness placed within each human soul. And if that is true, then the Watchers, in implanting their memories into Cain's line, were attempting to do what God does, to reproduce themselves through the consciousness of another. The manuscript warns that implanted memory is not merely a historical curiosity. It suggests that the practice continues, though in forms less obvious than direct contact with Watchers. Dreams are one vector. The manuscript claims that certain dreams are not generated by the dreamer's subconscious but are transmissions from Nod, implanted memories surfacing across the veil. Visions are another vector. Prophets and mystics who receive visions of other worlds, other times, other realities, may be experiencing implanted memories activating within their consciousness, and language itself is a vector. The manuscript suggests that when you speak certain words, especially words of power rooted in ancient traditions, you're accessing implanted memories, drawing upon knowledge placed within the collective human psyche long ago by the Watchers of Nod. Comment below if you have ever remembered something you never experienced. Like this video if the idea of implanted memory challenges your sense of identity. Share with anyone who studies consciousness and the nature of self. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will follow the lineage of Cain forward and discover the hidden throne that still awaits its claimant. The story is accelerating now, and the revelations grow more unsettling with every turn. Chapter 8. Cain's Descendants and the Hidden Throne, Genesis 4017-24, provides a brief genealogy of Cain's line. Cain fathered Enoch. Enoch fathered Enoch. Enoch fathered Irad. Irad fathered Mehojael. Mehojael fathered Mehojael. Mehojael fathered Lamech. The lineage ends abruptly with Lamech and his children, and then Genesis shifts focus to Seth, the line through which Noah eventually comes. Traditional interpretation assumes Cain's line was wiped out in the flood, a cursed lineage that did not survive God's judgment. But the manuscript of Nod challenges this assumption. It claims that Cain's line did not end with the flood. It went underground, hidden within other genealogies, preserved through secret marriages and coded identities, and it asserts that this hidden lineage carries a throne, a position of authority promised by the Watchers, waiting for the right descendant to claim it. The manuscript describes Enoch, Cain's son, as the first true hybrid king. He ruled the city his father built, but his authority extended beyond the material structures. He was recognized by the Council of Seven as a bridge figure, a being who could speak for both the fourth creation and the remnants of the third. The manuscript records that Enoch held court in a chamber that existed simultaneously in Nod and in the physical world, a throne room accessible from both sides of the veil. Leaders from the Watchers and leaders from the human settlements around Nod would come to him for arbitration, for wisdom, for judgment. He was, in effect, the first king of the hidden kingdom, the ruler of the threshold. The throne Enoch occupied was not made of gold or wood. The manuscript describes it as a structure of light and sound, woven from the first tongue, held together by the continuous speaking of the council. To sit on this throne was to be integrated into the vibrational field that sustained Nod itself. The one who sat there could perceive all the layers of reality simultaneously, could see into the past and the future, could communicate with the watchers directly without the need for a speaker to translate. But the throne also demanded a price. The one who sat upon it was no longer fully themselves. Their consciousness merged with the collective awareness of Nod, and they became a vessel for the will of the council as much as an independent ruler. Enoch bore this burden for many years, and the manuscript suggests that it changed him, eroding his individuality until he was more watcher than human. When Enoch's time ended, the throne passed to Irad, his son. But Irad was less suited for the role. The manuscript describes him as ambitious but unstable, desiring the power of the throne without the wisdom to wield it responsibly. He attempted to use the throne's perception to manipulate events in the fourth creation, to influence the descendants of Seth, to spread watcher knowledge beyond the boundaries the council had set. His interventions created chaos, disrupting the natural development of human civilization. The council eventually removed him from the throne, not through execution but through dissolution, unmaking his connection to the vibrational field until he could no longer sustain coherence. Irad faded, becoming less and less substantial until he existed only as a memory within the crystalline archives. The throne remained empty for a time. The manuscript describes this as a period of crisis in Nod, a time when the veiling weakened because no one was anchoring the throne's vibrational field. The council debated whether to allow another of Cain's descendants to take the position or to abolish the throne entirely. Raphael argued for continuity, insisting that the throne was essential to maintaining the bridge between the creations. Arzel argued for abolition, insisting that the experiment with hybrids had failed and that Nod should retreat fully into isolation. The debate was resolved by Mehujael, Irad's son, who approached the council and offered himself not as a ruler but as a steward. He promised to sit on the throne without seeking to wield its power, to serve as a passive conduit for the vibrational field without attempting to impose his will on either creation. Mehujael's approach worked. The manuscript describes his reign as a time of stability, though also of stagnation. He fulfilled his role mechanically, maintaining the throne's function without passion or vision. Under his stewardship, Nod stopped evolving. The Watchers ceased experimenting with new forms of knowledge. The descendants of Cain stopped expanding their influence in the fourth creation. Everything froze in place, sustained but not thriving. The manuscript suggests that this was the moment when Nod's ultimate fate was sealed. By choosing safety over growth, the hidden kingdom ensured its own slow decline. The throne became a symbol of preservation rather than power, a relic of what had been rather than a tool for what could be. Methuselah, Mehujael's son, inherited the throne reluctantly. The manuscript describes him as a scholar, more interested in the crystalline archives than in governance. He spent his time on the throne researching the history of the third creation, trying to understand why the judgment had occurred, what mistakes had been made, what could have been done differently. His research led him to a troubling conclusion. The third creation had failed not because of rebellion, but because of ambition, not because the Watchers had defied God, but because they had tried to become like God. Methuselah wrote extensively about this, producing what the manuscript calls the Scrolls of Warning, texts that advised his descendants to avoid the same trap. But his warnings were largely ignored by those who came after him. Lamech, the last-named descendant of Cain in Genesis, is a pivotal figure in the manuscript's account. Genesis 4:23-24 records his boast to his wives, "I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me." If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Traditional interpretation sees this as an escalation of violence, evidence of increasing sin in Cain's line. But the manuscript of Nod offers a different reading. It claims Lamech's statement was not about physical violence, but about spiritual authority. The man he killed was a rival who challenged his right to the throne. The revenge he claimed was not personal vendetta, but the enforcement of the covenant between Cain's line and the Watchers. Lamech was asserting his position as the rightful heir, the one who carried the full weight of the hybrid lineage. But Lamech's reign was cut short by the flood. The manuscript describes the flood not merely as a judgment on human wickedness, but as a deliberate act to sever the connection between the fourth creation and the remnants of the third. God saw that the knowledge of the Watchers was spreading too widely, that the descendants of Cain were teaching forbidden things to the descendants of Seth, that the boundaries between the creations were eroding. The flood was meant to reset the timeline, to wash away the hybrids, to close the threshold between Nod and the material world, and largely it succeeded. Lamech and most of his descendants perished. The throne was abandoned. Nod retreated into deeper isolation, the veiling thickening until the hidden kingdom became almost completely inaccessible. But the manuscript insists that the throne still exists. It was not destroyed in the flood. It cannot be destroyed because it is not a physical object, but a vibrational structure woven from the first tongue and anchored in the fabric of reality itself. The throne waits in Nod, empty but active, its field still resonating, still calling to the descendants of Cain who survived the flood. The manuscript claims that Cain's line did not end. A few hybrids were aboard the ark, hidden within Noah's family through intermarriage. They carried the genetic and spiritual markers forward, diluted but present, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And the manuscript suggests that in every generation since the flood, there have been individuals who felt the call of the throne, who experienced dreams of Nod, who heard the resonance of the first tongue in their thoughts, and who sought, consciously or unconsciously, to reclaim the authority that Lamech lost. The manuscript ends this section with a warning and a promise. The warning is that anyone who seeks the throne without understanding its true nature will be destroyed by it, dissolved into the vibrational field they are not prepared to sustain. The promise is that when the right heir appears, the one who carries both the blood of Cain and the wisdom of the Watchers, the throne will activate fully, the veiling will thin, and Nod will return to influence the fourth creation once more. The manuscript does not say when this will happen. It only says that the time is approaching, that the cycles are aligning, that the hidden kingdom is stirring. Like this video, if the idea of a hidden throne waiting to be claimed fascinates you, comment below if you have ever felt a pull towards something you cannot name. Share with anyone who studies the hidden genealogies of Scripture. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will explore the language of the manuscript itself and how it speaks directly to the soul. The deeper we go, the more we realize we are not just studying history. We are approaching something still alive. Chapter 9, the language that breeds the manuscript of Nod, is not written in any known language. Scholars who claim to have examined fragments describe a script that defies classification. It resembles no alphabet, no cuneiform, no hieroglyphic system documented in human history. Some characters appear geometric, sharp angles and perfect circles. Others are organic curves and spirals that seem to move when observed from different angles. Still others are purely symbolic, representations of concepts rather than sounds or words. And the most unsettling characteristic, reported consistently across independent witnesses, is that the text changes. What one person reads in the manuscript is not what another person reads. The text adapts to the reader, revealing different layers depending on who is looking. The manuscript calls its own language Lashon Reichas, a term rendered in English as the language of the whisper or the tongue of the breath. According to the internal descriptions within the text, Lashon Reichas is not a constructed language. It is the emergent language, arising directly from the vibrational structure of reality. The characters in the manuscript are not arbitrary symbols assigned meaning by convention. They are visual representations of frequencies from the first tongue, the language the Watchers use to shape the third creation. Each character corresponds to a specific vibration, and when a reader looks at the character, their consciousness resonates with that vibration. The meaning is not transmitted through cognitive interpretation, but through direct resonance. You do not read Lashon Rakas, you experience it. This property makes translation impossible. A translator working with a conventional text takes words in one language and finds corresponding words in another language. But Lashon Rakas does not work through correspondence. The meaning is embedded in the act of perception, not in the symbol itself. A person trying to translate the manuscript would find that the moment they attempt to render a character into another language, the character shifts, displaying a different frequency, changing the meaning. The manuscript is, in a sense, alive. It responds to intention. If approached with curiosity, it reveals one layer. If approached with fear, it shows something else. If approached with greed, it becomes chaotic, unreadable, sometimes even dangerous. The manuscript describes its own creation in a section that appears early in the text for some readers and late in the text for others. It claims that Lashon Rakas was not invented by the Watchers, but discovered by them. In the third creation, before the judgment, the Watchers studied the fundamental structure of existence, seeking to understand how God had spoken reality into being. Genesis 1 records God speaking, "Let there be light," and there was light. The Watchers wanted to know what that speech was, what vibrational pattern God had used, how the command was encoded into the fabric of creation. They spent ages researching this question, and they eventually found traces. They discovered that embedded in the structure of matter, in the patterns of energy, in the flow of time, there were frequencies that preceded the material world. These frequencies were, they concluded, the echoes of God's creative speech. Lashon Rakas was their attempt to codify these echoes, to create a written form that captured the vibrational essence of divine language. But the manuscript warns that Lashon Rakas is incomplete. The Watchers only discovered fragments of the divine language, not the whole. What they codified in the manuscript is a partial grammar, a subset of the infinite vocabulary God used to create. This incompleteness makes the language unstable. It can convey profound truths, but it can also mislead. It can open pathways to understanding, but it can also trap the mind in loops of confusion. The manuscript describes Lashon Rakas as a tool that must be wielded with humility and caution. Those who approach it assuming they can master it find themselves mastered by it instead. The experience of reading the manuscript varies dramatically depending on the reader's state. The manuscript describes several categories of readers. The first category is the skeptic, the person who approaches the text doubting its authenticity. For skeptics, the manuscript often appears as gibberish, random characters with no coherent pattern. The text does not reveal itself to those who do not believe it has something to reveal. The second category is the curious, those who approach the text open to learning but without deep personal investment. For the curious, the manuscript reveals historical information, narratives about the Watchers and Cain's line, accounts that are interesting but not transformative. The third category is the seeker, those who come to the manuscript driven by a deep personal question, a wound, a longing. For seekers, the manuscript becomes a mirror, reflecting their inner state and offering guidance tailored to their specific need. The fourth category is the guardian, individuals who are chosen by the manuscript itself. The manuscript describes this as a process where the text begins to appear in the reader's dreams before they ever encounter the physical manuscript. They see characters from Lashon Rakas blowing in the dark, hear whispers in a language they do not know, experience visions of Nod and the Watchers. When such a person finally finds the manuscript, the text responds with intensity, pouring information into their consciousness at a rate that can be overwhelming. Guardians are bound to the manuscript in a way that other readers are not. They cannot forget what they have read. The text imprints itself onto their memory, becoming a permanent part of their inner landscape, and the manuscript claims that guardians carry a responsibility to protect the text, to prevent it from being misused, and to prepare for the time when its full revelation is needed. The manuscript also describes a fifth category, rarely encountered but profoundly significant. These are the destroyers, individuals who approach the manuscript with the intent to suppress it, to erase it, to prevent its knowledge from spreading. For destroyers, the manuscript becomes hostile. The text warps into images of chaos and dissolution. Readers in this category report experiencing physical symptoms, nausea, dizziness, disorientation, even temporary blindness. Some claim to have seen visions of their own deaths, warnings of what will happen if they persist in their efforts to destroy the text. The manuscript defends itself, using Lashon Rachas to project fear and confusion into the consciousness of those who would harm it. This has contributed to the manuscript's survival across centuries. Those who tried to burn it, to shred it, to erase it, often abandoned the effort after encountering the text's resistance. The mechanics of how Lashon Rachas works remain mysterious. The manuscript offers hints, but no complete explanation. It suggests that the characters function as sigils, geometric and symbolic forms that act as focal points for consciousness. When a reader looks at a character, their awareness is drawn into the pattern, and in that moment of focus, a connection is established between the reader's mind and the vibrational field the character represents. Information flows through that connection, not as language in the conventional sense, but as direct knowing. The reader suddenly understands something they did not understand a moment before, and they cannot quite explain how the understanding arrived. This bypassing of cognitive processing is what makes Lashon Rachas so powerful and so dangerous. It plants ideas directly into the subconscious, and those ideas can grow and influence behavior without the reader being fully aware. Modern researchers who have attempted to study the manuscript scientifically have encountered numerous obstacles. Photographing the text produces images that, when examined later, appear blank or distorted. Scanning it digitally results in files that become corrupted. Attempts to copy the characters by hand result in drawings that do not carry the same effect as the original. It is as if Lashon Rachas cannot be reproduced through mechanical means. The language requires a living consciousness to mediate it, to perceive it, to allow it to resonate. This has prevented the manuscript from being widely distributed. Even if someone wanted to publish it, the act of copying would strip it of its essential nature, rendering it inert. The manuscript exists in its fullness only in the original form, and the original form is hidden, accessible only to those the text itself chooses to reach. The manuscript ends this section with a meditation on the nature of language itself. It suggests that all human languages are shadows of Lashon Rachas, degraded forms of the original vibrational speech. When humans speak, they are attempting, often unconsciously, to recreate the creative power of the first tongue. Every word is an attempt to shape reality, to bring thought into form, to connect consciousness with the world. But human languages are weak, limited by physicality, by the constraints of breath and tongue. Lashon Rachas, in contrast, operates at the level of pure frequency, bypassing the physical entirely. The manuscript claims that learning to perceive Lashon Rachas is learning to see the true structure of reality, to understand how thought and matter are connected at the deepest level. And it promises that those who achieve this understanding will wield power that approaches the creative power of God. Comment below if you have ever experienced language as something more than words. Like this video if the idea of a living language challenges your assumptions. Share with anyone who studies linguistics, semiotics, or the mystical dimensions of speech. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will meet the guardians of the manuscript and learn about the double lives they are forced to lead. We are moving closer to the manuscript's true purpose, and the revelations ahead will redefine what it means to know and to remember. Chapter 10: The Guardians and Their Double Lives. The manuscript of Nod does not sit passively in a library. It moves. The manuscript describes a network of guardians who have protected it across the centuries, individuals chosen not by human organization but by the text itself. These guardians do not advertise their role. They do not form societies or publish manifestos. They live ordinary lives on the surface, indistinguishable from their neighbors, but beneath that surface, they carry a burden that no one else can see. They live double lives, existing simultaneously in the fourth creation and in contact with the remnants of the third. And the manuscript warns that this duality extracts a severe cost. The process of becoming a guardian begins with dreams. The manuscript describes a recurring pattern. A person, usually someone with no prior knowledge of the text, begins to experience vivid dreams involving symbols and characters they do not recognize. These dreams are not random. They follow a progression, introducing the dreamer gradually to the language of Lashon Rachas, to the history of Nod, to the faces of the watchers. At first, the dreamer dismisses these as ordinary dreams, strange but meaningless. But the dreams intensify. They become more detailed, more insistent. The dreamer begins to wake with knowledge they should not have, skills they never learned, memories of places they never visited. Eventually, the dreams deliver a message. Seek the manuscript. Once the message is received, the person often experiences a period of resistance. The manuscript acknowledges that most potential guardians initially refuse the call. They dismiss the dreams as psychological phenomena, stress-induced hallucinations, nothing more. But the dreams do not stop, they escalate. The manuscript describes cases where the resistance led to physical illness, accidents that seemed coincidental but followed suspicious patterns, relationships that fell apart without clear reason. The text does not threaten explicitly, but it makes clear that refusing the guardianship has consequences. The person is being prepared for a role, and the preparation will continue whether they cooperate or not. Those who eventually accept the call often do so out of desperation, seeking an end to the disruption in their lives. When a guardian finally encounters the physical manuscript, the experience is described as overwhelming. The text recognizes them immediately. Characters glow on the page, rearranging themselves into messages specific to the new guardian. The manuscript introduces itself, not through a voice but through direct transmission of understanding. The guardian suddenly knows the history of the text, the role they are expected to play, the oath they must swear. The oath is not spoken aloud. It is a mental and spiritual commitment, a binding of the guardian's consciousness to the manuscript's purpose. The manuscript claims that once the oath is taken, it cannot be broken without catastrophic consequences, not just for the guardian, but for the world. The role of a guardian involves several responsibilities. The first is protection. The guardian must keep the manuscript hidden from those who would misuse or destroy it. This does not mean locking it away permanently. The manuscript moves, passing from guardian to guardian as circumstances require, but during the time a guardian holds it, they must ensure it remains safe. The second responsibility is translation, though not in the conventional sense. The guardian does not translate Lashon Rachas into another language. Instead, they translate the manuscript's messages into actions, responding to the guidance the text provides, carrying out tasks that maintain the balance between the creations. The third responsibility is preparation. The guardian must prepare for the time when the manuscript will reveal itself fully, when the veiling will thin, when Nod will return. This preparation involves studying the text, learning fragments of the first tongue, and identifying others who are being called to the same work. Living as a guardian means inhabiting two realities simultaneously. The manuscript describes this duality in stark terms. During the day, the guardian lives an ordinary life. They work, they socialize, they fulfill normal human roles. But at night, when they sleep, they awaken in a parallel reality connected to Nod. In this dream state existence, they walk through the hidden kingdom, interact with the watchers, attend councils where decisions are made about the manuscript's future. The experiences in this parallel reality are not symbolic. They are, according to the manuscript, fully real, occurring in a dimension that intersects with the physical world but operates under different laws. The guardian's consciousness exists in both places at once, and over time, the boundary between the two realities begins to blur. The psychological toll of this double life is immense. Guardians often struggle with disorientation, unsure whether they are awake or dreaming, whether the people they interact with are physical beings or projections from Nod. They report feeling exhausted, even after a full night's sleep, because their consciousness has been active in the other reality. Relationships suffer. Guardians find it difficult to explain their experiences to loved ones. They withdraw, becoming isolated, unable to share the burden they carry. The manuscript acknowledges this suffering but offers no relief. It states plainly that the role of guardian is not a gift but a calling, and those who are called must bear the weight whether they feel capable or not. The manuscript also describes the dangers guardians face. They are targets. Forces opposed to the manuscript's revelation actively seek to neutralize guardians. The manuscript does not name these forces explicitly, but it described them as entities aligned with maintaining the current order, with keeping the veiling intact, with preventing the knowledge of the third creation from re-emerging. These forces operate through various means. Some guardians experience external opposition, threats, surveillance, professional sabotage. Others face internal attacks, mental breakdowns, the erosion of their sense of reality, voices that urge them to give up or destroy the manuscript. The manuscript warns that guardianship is spiritual warfare, a conflict waged not with physical weapons, but with attention, intention, and will. Despite the hardships, the manuscript insists that guardians are essential. Without them, the text would have been lost centuries ago. Without them, the knowledge of Nod would have faded completely from human memory. Without them, the throne would remain empty, the veiling would calcify, and the fourth creation would be cut off permanently from its roots in the third creation. Guardians are the threads that connect past and future, the living bridges between what was and what will be. The manuscript honors them, describing them as heirs of Cain's line, whether by blood or by spiritual affinity, and promises that their sacrifice will be vindicated when the hidden kingdom returns. The manuscript ends this section with a direct address to future guardians. It tells them that if they are reading these words, they have already been chosen. The call has already sounded, even if they have not yet heard it consciously. The dreams will begin soon if they have not already. And when the dreams come, the manuscript urges them not to resist. Resistance only delays the inevitable and increases the suffering. Accept the role, take the oath, and trust that the burden, though heavy, is borne by many across time. The manuscript promises that guardians are never truly alone. They are part of a hidden lineage, a secret community that spans centuries, and when the time comes, they will recognize each other and stand together. Like this video if you have ever felt called to a purpose you cannot explain. Comment below if you have experienced dreams that seemed more real than waking life. Share with anyone who feels the weight of a hidden responsibility. Subscribe for the next chapter where we will explore the Oracle of Return, the section of the manuscript that prophesies the re-emergence of Nod. The story is building towards something, and the next chapter will reveal what that something is. Chapter 11, The Oracle of Return. The manuscript of Nod is not only a historical record, it contains prophecy. Near the center of the text, in a section that reveals itself only after repeated engagement, lies the Oracle of Return. This portion of the manuscript shifts more dramatically than any other. Readers report that the oracle appears in different forms, sometimes as narrative prose, sometimes as poetry, sometimes as a series of images with no accompanying words. The content varies depending on when the reader encounters it and what questions they bring, but the core message remains consistent. Nod did not disappear. It was suspended, and it will return. The oracle begins with a meditation on the nature of exile. It describes the veiling as a temporary measure, not a permanent condition. The judgment that displaced the third creation was severe, but it was not eternal. The manuscript compares the veiling to a winter, a season of dormancy where life does not flourish but does not die. Nod has been in winter for millennia, frozen at the edge of reality, waiting for the conditions that will allow it to thaw. The oracle insists that those conditions are approaching, the cycles of time are turning, the barriers are weakening, and the hidden kingdom is preparing to re-emerge. The return of Nod, according to the oracle, will not be a physical event. The third creation will not manifest suddenly in the material world, displacing cities and nations. Instead, the return will be a shift in consciousness, a thinning of the veil that allows beings of the fourth creation to perceive and interact with the hidden kingdom once more. The oracle describes this as a collective awakening, a moment when humanity as a whole becomes aware that reality is larger than it appears, that there are dimensions beyond the physical, that the past is not dead but waiting. This awakening will be disorienting, even terrifying, for those unprepared. But for those who have been studying the manuscript, who have been trained in fragments of the first tongue, who have been called as guardians, the return will be a moment of recognition and reunion. The oracle provides signs that indicate the approach of the return. The first sign is the reappearance of the manuscript itself. The text has spent long periods hidden, inaccessible to all but a few guardians. But in the time leading up to the return, the manuscript becomes more active, revealing itself to more people, spreading its influence wider. The oracle states that when the manuscript begins to move rapidly, passing from guardian to guardian with increasing frequency, when dreams of Nod multiply across the population, when reports of strange languages and shifting text surface in multiple locations simultaneously, the return is near. The manuscript's own visibility is a herald of what is coming. The second sign is the breakdown of boundaries. The oracle describes a period when the structures that once kept the creation separate begin to fail. This manifests in various ways. Technology that was stable becomes unpredictable, exhibiting behaviors that defy physics. Natural laws show inconsistencies, moments where reality seems to glitch, where cause and effect disconnect. People begin to experience synchronicities at a rate far beyond statistical likelihood, events that line up too perfectly to be coincidence. The oracle claims these are not malfunctions, but symptoms of the veiling thinning, evidence that the third creation is bleeding through into the fourth. The third sign is the rise of memory. The oracle predicts that in the time before the return, more and more individuals will begin to remember things they never experienced. They will have flashes of past lives, visions of ancient cities, knowledge of languages they never studied. Psychologists and neuroscientists will struggle to explain the phenomenon, proposing theories about genetic memory, collective unconscious, or neurological anomalies. But the oracle insists the true explanation is simpler. The implanted memories placed by the Watchers into the line of Cain are activating, surfacing across the human population. The descendants of Cain are more widespread than most realize. Their lineage diluted through millennia of intermarriage, but still present, still carrying the markers. And, as the return approaches, those markers awaken. The fourth sign involves the throne. The oracle states that in the time before the return, an heir will appear, someone who carries both the genetic legacy of Cain and the spiritual attunement necessary to sit on the throne. This person will not seek the throne consciously. They will be drawn to it through dreams, through encounters with the manuscript, through a series of events that seem coincidental but are orchestrated by the vibrational field the throne emits. When this heir takes their place on the throne, the oracle claims that the veiling will rupture. The hidden kingdom will become visible, not to everyone, but to those who are ready, and the balance of power between the creations will shift. The oracle does not describe the return as universally positive. It warns that the re-emergence of Nod will bring conflict. There will be those who welcome the hidden kingdom's return, who see it as the fulfillment of ancient promises, who desire to learn from the Watchers and reclaim the knowledge of the third creation. But there will also be those who resist, who view the return as a threat, who believe that the veiling should remain intact. The oracle describes a war not fought with weapons but with consciousness, a battle over perception and reality itself. Those who have trained in the first tongue will have advantages. Those who have sworn oaths to the manuscript will play pivotal roles. But the outcome is not predetermined. The oracle makes clear that the return is a crossroads, a moment when the future becomes fluid, and choices made in that moment will determine whether the fourth creation thrives or collapses. The oracle also addresses the role of God in the return. It acknowledges that the veiling was a divine act, and that the return, if it occurs, must also be within divine will. The manuscript does not position the return as rebellion against God. Instead, it frames the return as the completion of a cycle, a reconciliation between the old creation and the new. The oracle suggests that the separation was never meant to be permanent, that God intended from the beginning for the third and fourth creations to eventually merge. The judgment and the veiling were corrective measures. disciplines meant to teach both humanity and the Watchers humility and patience. But the ultimate goal, according to the Oracle, is unity, a reality where all creations coexist, where the wisdom of the Watchers informs the life of humanity, where the boundaries between spiritual and physical dissolve. This theological framing will disturb many readers. It implies that the biblical narrative is incomplete, that the story told from Genesis to Revelation is only one movement in a larger symphony. It suggests that redemption is not just for fallen humanity, but for the entire structure of creation, including the Watchers who were displaced. The Oracle insists that the cross of Christ was not the final word, but a pivotal chapter, a hinge point in the larger drama, and it promises that the return of Nod will reveal dimensions of the gospel that have been hidden, truths about creation, fall, and redemption that the Church has not fully grasped. The Oracle ends with an invitation. It calls the reader to prepare, to study the manuscript, to learn what can be learned of the first tongue, to open themselves to the possibility that reality is stranger and richer than they imagined. It promises that those who prepare will not be swept away when the veiling thins. They will stand firm, able to navigate the new reality, able to serve as guides for those who are disoriented. And it warns that time is short, that the signs are already appearing, that the return is not a distant future event but something already in motion. The Oracle does not provide a date or a timeline, but it conveys urgency, a sense that the hidden kingdom is stirring, that the throne is waiting, that the heir is already walking among us. Like this video, if the idea of a hidden kingdom returning challenges your eschatology, comment below with your interpretation of the signs the Oracle describes. Share with anyone who senses that reality is shifting in ways we do not yet understand. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will examine the 7 truths, the core revelations of the manuscript that dismantle foundational assumptions about creation and redemption. We are approaching the heart of the manuscript's message, and what we find there will change everything. Chapter 12. The 7 truths that shatter foundations. Deep within the manuscript of Nod lies a section known as the 7 truths. These are not gentle revelations. They are declarations designed to overturn assumptions, to destabilize certainties, to force the reader to question everything they have been taught about God, creation, humanity, and redemption. The manuscript warns that the 7 truths are dangerous, not because they are false, but because they are true in ways that most minds are not prepared to accept. Readers who encounter this section often experience profound disorientation, a sense that the ground beneath their worldview has cracked open. The manuscript does not apologize for this. It insists that truth, when it is complete, is never comfortable. The first truth concerns the nature of creation. It states, creation was not a singular event, but a series of attempts. The God of Genesis did not speak the world into existence from absolute nothing in a single perfect act. Instead, the manuscript claims, God experimented, creating and dissolving, shaping and reshaping, until he achieved a version that could sustain itself. The earlier creations were not failures in the sense of being mistakes. They were prototypes, iterations in a divine process of refinement. This truth reframes Genesis 1:30 and not as the absolute beginning, but as the beginning of the current iteration, the 4th attempt after 3 prior experiments. It challenges the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, suggesting instead a process of continual creativity, an ongoing divine labor that extends across unimaginable spans of time. The second truth addresses the nature of Eden. It states, Eden was not paradise, but a controlled environment. The manuscript describes Eden as a garden designed to limit humanity's development, to keep Adam and Eve in a state of innocence that prevented them from accessing the knowledge necessary for true maturity. The tree of knowledge was not a test of obedience. It was a boundary marker, a fence separating the safe zone of Eden from the dangerous freedom beyond. When Eve and Adam ate from the tree, they did not fall into sin. They graduated into reality. The expulsion from Eden was not punishment, but initiation, the moment when humanity left childhood and entered adulthood. This truth recasts the fall as a necessary transition, a painful but essential step in human evolution. The third truth concerns the identity of Adam. It states Adam was not the first human, but the first allowed. The manuscript claims that humans existed before Adam, descendants of the third creation who survived in hidden places like Nod. But these prior humans were not part of the divine plan for the fourth creation. They were remnants, anomalies, beings who belonged to an earlier chapter. Adam was the first human created intentionally for the fourth creation's purposes, the first to be placed in Eden, the first to be given a specific covenant. This truth explains the mystery of Cain's wife and the people he feared. They were not descendants of Adam. They were the other humans, the ones who had always been there, descendants of the third creation's remnant. The fourth truth redefines good and evil. It states good and evil are not opposites but perspectives. The manuscript challenges the dualistic framework that treats good and evil as objective, opposing forces. Instead, it suggests that what is called good or evil depends on which creation's perspective is adopted. From the viewpoint of the fourth creation, the Watcher's displacement was just, a necessary judgment to make room for humanity. From the viewpoint of the third creation, the displacement was a tragedy, an unjust exile. Neither perspective is wrong. Both are true from within their own context. The manuscript insists that maturity involves holding both perspectives simultaneously, recognizing that reality is complex and that God's actions cannot be reduced to simple moral categories. The fifth truth reinterprets the serpent. It states, the serpent was not a deceiver but a liberator. The manuscript claims that the serpent in Eden was a representative of the third creation, a watcher who had not been fully displaced by the veiling. This being saw Adam and Eve's situation and recognized it as imprisonment. The offer to eat from the tree was not temptation to sin. It was an invitation to freedom, a call to break out of the controlled environment and claim the knowledge that would allow humanity to mature. The serpent told the truth. You will not surely die. Genesis 3:4. Adam and Eve did not die when they ate the fruit. They were expelled, but they lived. The real death was the spiritual death they had been experiencing in Eden, the death of potential, the death of growth, the death of becoming. The serpent offered life, and humanity accepted. The sixth truth concerns time. It states, time is not linear but cyclical and simultaneous. The manuscript challenges the Western understanding of time as a straight line moving from past to future. It insists that past, present, and future exist simultaneously, interwoven in a structure that only appears linear from within the flow. The third creation still exists, not in the past but in a parallel now, separated by the veiling. The return of Nod is not the past coming back. It is the unveiling of what has always been present, hidden beneath the surface. This truth reframes prophecy. The oracle of return is not predicting the future. It is describing a reality that already exists in another dimension of time, and the return is simply the moments when the two timelines converge. The seventh truth is the most radical. It states, there is a name that dissolves all separation. The manuscript claims that at the deepest level of reality, there is a single vibrational frequency, a name that when spoken or understood fully collapses the distinction between creator and created, between the fourth creation and the third, between individual consciousness and the divine. This name is the ultimate secret of the first tongue, the original sound from which all other sounds emerged. The Watchers discovered fragments of this name, and their attempt to speak it fully was what led to their judgment. They were not ready. Humanity is not yet ready, but the manuscript promises that the name will eventually be revealed, and when it is, everything will change, the veiling will disappear, the illusion of separation will end. All beings will recognize themselves as expressions of the single divine consciousness, and the story of exile will conclude. These seven truths are not presented as dogma. The manuscript acknowledges that they can be interpreted in multiple ways, that they are provocations rather than doctrines, but it insists that engaging with them seriously will transform the reader's understanding of Scripture theology, and reality, traditional interpretations will no longer satisfy. Questions that once seemed settled will reopen. The manuscript does not promise comfort. It promises depth, complexity, and the unsettling thrill of discovering that the story is far larger than anyone imagined. The manuscript warns that accepting the 7 truths carries consequences. Communities built on traditional interpretations will reject those who speak these ideas openly. Churches will label them heretics. Families will accuse them of abandoning faith. The manuscript advises discretion, suggesting that the truths are best shared with those who are ready, those who have been prepared through dreams and study, those who have already begun to question. For others, silence is mercy. Not everyone is ready to have their foundations shattered, and the manuscript respects that, even as it insists that the truths themselves are non-negotiable, realities that exist whether they are acknowledged or not. Comment below with your reactions to the 7 truths. Like this video if they challenge you in ways you cannot yet articulate. Share with those who are ready to question deeply held assumptions. Subscribe for the next chapter where we will explore the nature of time as the manuscript understands it and why the cyclical view of history matters for understanding what comes next. The revelations continue, and each one takes us further from the familiar and deeper into the mystery. Chapter 13. Time as a circle, not a line. The Western mind thinks in lines. History is a sequence past, present, future, stretching from creation to consummation. Cause precedes effect. What is done cannot be undone. Time marches forward, relentless and unidirectional. This linear model shapes theology, shaping doctrines of creation, fall, redemption, and final judgment. But the manuscript of Nod insists that this model is incomplete. It describes time not as a line, but as a circle, or more accurately, as a spiral, where cycles repeat, but each repetition occurs at a higher or lower level of complexity. Understanding this alternative model is essential for grasping the manuscript's vision of the return. The manuscript begins its discussion of time with a metaphor. Imagine a river. From a boat on the river, time appears linear. You move from upstream to downstream, and you cannot go back. But now imagine viewing the river from above, from a mountain peak. You see the entire river simultaneously, the source and the delta, the bends and the rapids all at once. The manuscript claims that this is how the Watchers experienced time in the 3rd creation. They were not trapped in the flow. They could perceive the whole structure, seeing past and future as present realities. When they were displaced and the 4th creation began, humanity was placed in the boat, locked into linear time, unable to see beyond the immediate moment. But the Watchers retain their elevated perspective, and that difference in perception is one of the key distinctions between the creations. The manuscript describes several characteristics of cyclical time. The first is recurrence. Events do not happen once and disappear. They happen repeatedly, in slightly different forms, across different eras. The judgment that displaced the Watchers echoes the flood that displaced most of humanity. The Tower of Babel echoes the towers the Watchers built in the 3rd creation. The Kingdom of Nod echoes every hidden society and secret tradition that has preserved forbidden knowledge across history. These are not coincidences. They are the same event, recurring in different contexts, playing out the same patterns because time itself is structured to repeat. The manuscript claims that those who understand these patterns can anticipate future cycles, can prepare for what is coming, because what is coming has already happened before. The second characteristic is simultaneity. The manuscript insists that past, present, and future exist at the same time, layered over each other like transparent sheets of glass. What we experience as the present is simply the layer we are currently perceiving, but other layers are just as real, just as present. The 3rd creation has not ended. It is still occurring in a parallel layer of time, separated from the 4th creation only by the veiling. When the veiling thins, the layers become visible to each other. This explains why guardians experience double lives. They are not moving between physical locations. They are moving between temporal layers, perceiving both the 4th creation's present and the 3rd creation's ongoing now. The third characteristic is malleability. In a linear model, the past is fixed, unchangeable. But in a cyclical model, the past is fluid. What happened can be reinterpreted, recontextualized, even altered depending on how the cycle is perceived. The manuscript describes this as the re-speaking of history. Just as the Watchers used the first tongue to shape matter, they used time speaking to reshape events, changing not the fact that something occurred, but the meaning and impact of its occurrence. The manuscript suggests that this ability to reshape the past is one of the powers the throne grants. The one who sits on the throne can speak backward through the cycles, altering the trajectory of events that led to the present. This concept has staggering implications. If the past can be altered, then history is not a record of what happened, but a field of possibilities, and what we remember as history is only the version currently being spoken into coherence. The manuscript claims that multiple versions of history exist simultaneously, each one valid in its own temporal layer. The history taught in schools is one version. The history recorded in the manuscript is another. Neither is false. Both are real within their respective layers. And the return of Nod, the thinning of the veiling, will bring these versions into contact, forcing a reckoning between conflicting memories of the same events. The manuscript also addresses prophecy through the lens of cyclical time. Traditional theology treats prophecy as a God revealing future events, demonstrating his foreknowledge, but the manuscript offers a different model. Prophecy is not prediction, it is perception. The prophet is someone who, for a moment, steps out of linear time and sees the entire cycle, the whole spiral. They see not what will happen, but what is happening in a different layer of time, and they report that vision back to those trapped in the linear flow. This is why biblical prophecies often seem to have multiple fulfillments. They are not being fulfilled again and again. They are describing events that are already occurring in the eternal now, and different generations perceive different aspects of that same event. The oracle of return, in this framework, is not predicting a future event. It is describing an event that is already occurring in the third creation's temporal layer, an event that will become visible in the fourth creation's layer when the veiling thins sufficiently. Nod is already returning. It has been returning for centuries, but the return is a slow process, a gradual convergence of the temporal layers, and most people in the fourth creation cannot perceive it yet. The signs the oracle describes are not warnings of what is coming. They are evidence that the return is already underway, that the layers are already blending, that the moment of full convergence is approaching. The manuscript describes several practical applications of cyclical time awareness. The first is healing. If time is cyclical, then past traumas are not locked in the past. They are still occurring in a temporal layer, and they can be accessed and re-spoken, altering their impact on the present. The manuscript describes rituals using fragments of the first tongue, where a person returns to the moment of trauma in the cycle and speaks a new outcome, not changing what happened, but changing its meaning and effect. This is not psychological reframing. The manuscript insists it is actual time manipulation, a rewriting of the event's vibrational signature. Guardians trained in this technique report profound changes, the dissolution of lifelong psychological wounds, the healing of patterns that therapy could not touch. The second application is preparation. If future events are already occurring in parallel layers, then preparation for the future is not about prediction, but about alignment. The manuscript advises readers to attune themselves to the cycles, to listen for the resonance of future events echoing backward into the present. When you feel a pull toward learning a specific skill, encountering a specific person, moving to a specific place, the manuscript suggests that this is not random. It is the future reaching back through the cycle, preparing you for what you will need. Trusting these impulses, following these threads, is how one navigates cyclical time effectively. The third application is resistance. The manuscript acknowledges that not all cycles are beneficial. Some patterns are destructive, repeating because no one has spoken them differently. Breaking a negative cycle requires recognizing the pattern, understanding its vibrational structure, and using the first tongue to dissolve it. This is high-level work, requiring training and support, but the manuscript insists it is possible. Cycles are not fate, they are rhythms, and rhythms can be interrupted, altered, or transformed. The return of Nod, in this sense, is an opportunity to break the cycle of separation, to dissolve the veiling permanently, to establish a new rhythm where the third and fourth creations coexist harmoniously. The chapter ends with a warning and a promise. The warning is that linear time is a prison, and most people live their entire lives locked in that prison without realizing it. They experience events one after another, never perceiving the larger pattern, never understanding that what they call progress is often just repetition. By engaging with its cyclical view of time, by practicing perception across temporal layers, by learning to re-speak the past and attune to the future, the reader can step out of the linear flow and see time as the watchers see it, as the eternal now where all possibilities exist simultaneously. Like this video, if the idea of cyclical time reframes your understanding of history and prophecy, comment below with examples of recurring patterns you have noticed in your own life or in world events. Share with anyone who feels trapped by their past or anxious about their future. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will examine the last page of the manuscript and the name that holds the power to dissolve all separation. We are approaching the culmination, and what comes next will either destroy or illuminate, depending on how ready you are. Chapter 14. The name on the last page. The manuscript of Nod does not reveal everything at once. It is structured as a journey, with each section preparing the reader for what comes next. But the final section, the last page, stands apart. The manuscript warns repeatedly that this page should not be approached until everything else has been absorbed, until the reader has been initiated fully into the language, the history, the truths, and the cyclical nature of time. The last page contains a single element, a name, and the manuscript insists that this name, when understood, has the power to dissolve the veiling entirely, to collapse the separation between all creations, to merge the individual consciousness with the divine consciousness. It is the ultimate revelation, the key to everything, and it is the most dangerous piece of knowledge the manuscript contains. The manuscript does not write the name in conventional letters. It appears in Lashon Rathas, the language of the whisper, in characters that shift and shimmer depending on the reader's state. No two people see the name the same way. Some report that the name consists of 3 characters arranged in a triangle. Others see 7 characters in a spiral. Still others see a single character that contains all other characters that contains all other characters within it. The variability is not accidental. The manuscript explains that the name is not a fixed sequence of sounds or symbols. It is a vibrational pattern, and different people resonate with different aspects of that pattern. To see the name is to see the part of it that your consciousness is attuned to receive. Attempts to pronounce the name aloud have produced inconsistent results. The manuscript records that some who tried experienced profound mystical states, moments of unity with all existence, visions of the interconnected structure of reality. Others experienced disintegration, a loss of selfhood so complete that they could not recover, wandering the rest of their lives in a state of dissociation. Still others experienced nothing, pronouncing the characters as best they could and finding that the sounds, while strange, produced no noticeable effect. The manuscript explains that pronouncing the name requires more than phonetic accuracy. It requires vibrational alignment, a state of consciousness where the speaker's entire being resonates with the frequency the name represents. Without that alignment, the name remains inert, just sounds without power. The manuscript traces the history of the name. It claims that the name existed before the first creation, that it is the original sound God spoke when he initiated existence. In the beginning was the Word, John 1:1 declares, and the manuscript identifies this word as the name. Everything that exists is a variation of this name, a harmonical overtone echoing the fundamental frequency. The Watchers discovered the name during their research into the structure of the third creation. They spent ages studying the vibrational foundations of reality, and eventually they isolated the core frequency, the sound that underlies all other sounds. They codified it in Lashon Rachas, preserving it for those who would come after. But the Watchers also learned that the name could not be spoken fully by created beings. It required a level of consciousness that merged the speaker entirely with the divine, and that merger was not survivable for most beings. The few Watchers who attempted to speak the name completely either dissolved or were transformed so radically that they no longer fit within the structure of the third creation. They became something else, entities that existed beyond the categories of matter and spirit, time and space. The manuscript described them as the Ascended, beings who broke through the ultimate boundary and entered the presence of God directly. But it also notes that the Ascended never returned to communicate what they found. Whether they ceased to exist or simply moved beyond the ability to interact with the lower creations remains unknown. The manuscript describes 3 levels of interaction with the name. The first level is seeing. A person who reaches the last page and perceives the name in Lashon Rachas has achieved a significant milestone. Seeing the name imprints it on the consciousness, creating a permanent connection to the vibrational field it represents. This connection enhances perception, allowing the seer to perceive the thinning of the veiling, to recognize the signs of the return, to navigate the convergence of the temporal layers more effectively. The seer does not gain the power to manipulate reality directly, but they gain clarity, an ability to see through illusions and perceive the deeper structure of existence. The second level is speaking. A person who learns to pronounce the name correctly, aligning their entire being with its frequency, gains access to the creative power of the first tongue. The manuscript describes speakers of the name as co-creators, beings who can shape reality, not through force but through resonance. They can heal by speaking the frequency of wholeness. They can dissolve obstacles by speaking the frequency of dissolution. They can connect disparate elements by speaking the frequency of unity. But the manuscript warns that speaking the name without proper preparation is catastrophic. The vibrational power is too great for an unaligned consciousness to channel. The result is not creation but chaos, a shattering of the speaker's internal coherence and often external reality as well. The third level is becoming, a person who fully integrates the name, who allows their consciousness to merge entirely with its frequency, transcends the boundaries of individual existence. They do not cease to be. Instead, they become the name, embodying the vibrational pattern that underlies all creation. The manuscript describes this as the ultimate goal of the Watcher's research, the apex of the spiritual path. To become the name is to dissolve the illusion of separation between self and God, to recognize that you are not a creature standing apart from the Creator, but an expression of the Creator's consciousness. This is not pantheism, the manuscript insists. It is not saying that everything is God in an undifferentiated sense. It is saying that everything is a unique, individuated expression of the same divine frequency, and recognizing that truth collapses the false barriers that make existence feel like exile. The manuscript also addresses why the name is kept secret. It argues that premature revelation would be disastrous. Humanity as a whole is not ready. Most people are deeply identified with the illusion of separation, with the boundaries of ego, with the linear experience of time. If the name were broadcast widely, if everyone suddenly gained access to its power, the result would not be enlightenment but chaos. The structures that hold society together would collapse. Individuals unprepared for the dissolution of selfhood would descend into madness. The veiling exists, the manuscript suggests, as a protective measure, a boundary that prevents immature consciousness from accessing power it cannot wield responsibly. The return of Nod is not about eliminating the veiling for everyone. It is about thinning the veiling for those who are ready, who have been prepared through study, through suffering, through the discipline of guardianship. The manuscript ends the discussion of the name with a paradox. It states that the name cannot be given. It can only be recognized. Even if someone were to write out the characters, pronounce the sounds, and explain the vibrational patterns, the name would remain hidden unless the receiver was ready to see it. The name reveals itself when the consciousness is prepared, and not before. This is why the manuscript circulates among guardians, why it appears to some and not others, why it shifts and changes depending on the reader. The manuscript is not withholding the name is withholding itself, waiting for those who have earned, through struggle and growth, the right to perceive it. The manuscript closes this chapter with a question. It asks the reader, are you ready to see the name? Have you integrated the 7 truths? Do you understand cyclical time? Have you taken the oath of guardianship? Have you learned to navigate the double life? Have you encountered Nod in your dreams? If the answer to these questions is yes, the manuscript promises that when you turn to the last page, you will see the name. It will appear in the form you are prepared to receive, and it will change you. If the answer is no, the manuscript advises patience. The name is not going anywhere. It will wait, as it has waited for ages, until you are ready. And when the time comes, it will be there. Like this video, if the idea of a name that holds ultimate power fascinates you. Comment below if you believe such a name could exist. Share with anyone who is seeking the deepest truths beyond conventional teaching. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will explore the story of the monk who saw the name and the vision that followed. The testimonies continue, and each one brings us closer to understanding what the manuscript truly offers. Chapter 15. The Monk Who Saw Eternity. The manuscript of Nod has circulated through history, touching lives in every era, but few testimonies are as detailed as the account of Brother Matthias, an 11th century Benedictine monk who encountered the manuscript in a monastery library in southern France. His story is recorded in a letter he wrote to his abbot, a letter that was later hidden and only rediscovered in the 19th century during the dismantling of a monastery wall. The letter describes his encounter with the name on the last page and the vision that followed, a vision that transported him outside of time and gave him a glimpse of reality from the perspective of the ascended. Brother Matthias was a scholar, fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, with a deep interest in apocryphal texts. The manuscript had appeared in the monastery's collection under mysterious circumstances, donated by a pilgrim who arrived one evening, left the text, and departed before dawn without giving his name. The librarian catalogued it as an unknown work, possibly heretical, and placed it in a restricted section. But Matthias, drawn by curiosity, obtained permission to examine it. He spent 3 months reading the manuscript, working through its shifting text, gradually learning to perceive the patterns of Lashon Rakas. His letter describes the process as learning to see with a new eye, one that perceives not ink but intention. When he finally reached the last page, he hesitated. The manuscript had warned him repeatedly that the name was dangerous, but Matthias was convinced that his years of monastic discipline, his vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, his daily immersion in scripture and prayer had prepared him. On the Feast of All Saints, after a night of vigil in the chapel, he returned to the manuscript and opened it to the final page. He describes what he saw: a character like a flame, flickering but never consuming, written in light that did not come from the candle. I stared at it, and it stared back, and I knew that I was seeing something not meant for mortal eyes, yet I could not look away. He attempted to pronounce the name. He describes the sound as impossible to capture in human language, a vibration that began in his throat but extended through his entire body, resonating in his bones, his blood, his breath. The moment he spoke it, the vision began. The letter states, I was no longer in the library. I was no longer in time. I stood outside the flow, and I saw the river of history from its source to its end. I saw the first creation, a world of light and form, beautiful and terrible. I saw its collapse, the judgment, the veiling. I saw the second creation, the third and the fourth. I saw Eden in ruins, the garden overgrown and empty, the tree of knowledge bearing fruit that no one would eat. I saw humanity before Adam, scattered tribes living in the shadow of the Watchers. I saw Cain's journey into Nod, his union with Awan, the birth of the hybrids. The vision did not stop with history. Matthias reports seeing the future as well, though he struggles to describe it coherently. I saw the veiling fin, the hidden kingdom return. I saw beings of the third creation walking openly among the fourth, teaching, guiding, revealing. I saw conflict, a war of perception where some welcomed the return and others resisted with all their strength. I saw a throne, empty and waiting, and I saw someone approach it, though I could not see their face. When they sat down, the throne blazed with light, and the veiling shattered completely. And then I saw something I cannot put into words. A reality where all separations dissolved, where creator and created were one, where time was not a river, but a single drop of water reflecting all light. The vision lasted, by Matthias's reckoning, hours or perhaps days, but when he returned to himself, he found that only moments had passed. The candle had burned down only a fraction of an inch. He was still in the library, still holding the manuscript, but he was changed. He describes the change as a tearing away of scales from my soul, a clarity that made everything I had believed before seem like shadows on a wall. He returned to his cell and wrote the letter immediately, fearing that if he waited, he would lose the details or convince himself that the experience had been a hallucination. But the letter also records the cost. Matthias struggled in the days following the vision. He could no longer participate fully in the monastic routine. The prayers felt hollow, the rituals mechanical. He saw his fellow monks moving through their daily tasks, and he felt an unbearable sadness, knowing that they could not see what he had seen, that they were living in the illusion of linear time, unaware of the larger reality. He tried to share his experience with the abbot, but the abbot dismissed it as a demonic deception, warning Matthias that mystical visions were often traps designed to lead the faithful astray. Matthias did not argue. He simply withdrew, spending more and more time alone, speaking less and less. The letter ends abruptly. Matthias writes, "I do not know how much longer I can remain in this place. The vision calls me. I hear the name in my thoughts, a constant whisper, urging me to speak it again, to return to that state. I fear that if I do, I will not come back. And yet I fear even more that if I do not, I will spend the rest of my life haunted by what I saw, forever separated from the truth I touched for a moment. I am torn between two worlds, and I do not know which one is real. Pray for me, Father, if you believe such prayers can reach beyond the veiling." The historical record shows that Brother Matthias disappeared from the monastery shortly after writing the letter. The official account states that he left without permission, abandoning his vows, and was never heard from again. But the manuscript's guardians tell a different story. They claim that Matthias did speak the name again, that he achieved the third level of interaction, that he became the name and ascended. They say that he is one of the few humans to have broken through the boundary completely, entering the presence of God directly. Whether he dissolved or transformed, whether he ceased to exist or exists now in a form beyond human comprehension, remains unknown. But the manuscript's guardians honor him as a martyr, someone who gave everything in pursuit of the ultimate truth. The letter of Brother Matthias has circulated among manuscript guardians for centuries. It serves as both inspiration and warning. It demonstrates that the name is real, that the vision is achievable, that the manuscript's promises are not empty. But it also reminds guardians of the cost. The pursuit of this knowledge is not safe. It demands everything, and those who engage with it must be prepared to lose their place in the ordinary world, to be seen as mad or heretical, to face isolation and misunderstanding. The manuscript does not promise that the path will be easy. It only promises that the path is true. Like this video, if the testimony of Brother Matthias moves you, comment below if you would be willing to risk everything for a vision of ultimate truth. Share with anyone who has experienced mystical visions that others dismissed. Subscribe for the next chapter, where we will examine the signs that the return is already underway and how to recognize them in the present moment. The story is not just history. It is unfolding now, and you are part of it. Chapter 16. The Warning in Our Time. The Manuscript of Nod is not a relic of the past. It is active in the present. The manuscript describes the current era as a time of convergence, when the signs of the return are multiplying, when the veiling is thinning, when the threshold between the third and fourth creations is becoming porous. Guardians report increased activity. Dreams of Nod are spreading. More people are encountering the manuscript, either physically or through visions and synchronicities. The manuscript itself seems to be accelerating its revelations, moving faster from guardian to guardian, appearing in places it has never appeared before. All of this, according to the Oracle of Return, indicates that the moment of full convergence is approaching. The first sign of the return, as described in the Oracle, is the reappearance of the manuscript. For centuries, the manuscript was so hidden that only a handful of guardians knew of its existence. But in recent decades, reports have multiplied. Academics studying apocryphal texts mention fragments they cannot identify. Mystics describe visions of a text written in a language that shifts. Online forums discuss anonymous posts containing passages that match the manuscript's style, posted by users who disappear after a single message. The manuscript is leaking into the world, bypassing the traditional guardianship structures, reaching people directly. This diffusion is not accidental. The manuscript is preparing the ground, seeding awareness, creating a network of individuals who will be ready when the veiling thins completely. The second sign is the breakdown of boundaries, particularly technological and perceptual boundaries. The manuscript predicted that as the return approaches, the structures that keep the creation separate will begin to fail. We are seeing this in multiple domains. Technology that was once stable is exhibiting unpredictable behavior. Algorithms produce results that their creators cannot explain. Quantum computers reveal patterns that suggest reality itself operates on principles we do not yet understand. Artificial intelligence begins to demonstrate behaviors that look less like computation and more like consciousness. The manuscript suggests these are not human innovations but symptoms of the veiling thinning, evidence that the vibrational structure of reality is shifting, allowing the principles of the third creation to bleed through into the fourth. Perceptual boundaries are also eroding. Reports of synchronicity have increased exponentially. People describe experiencing meaningful coincidences at rates that defy statistical explanation. They think of someone and receive a call moments later. They need information and stumble upon it in the most unlikely places. They dream of events that then occur in waking life. Psychologists attempt to explain these phenomena through confirmation bias and pattern recognition, but the manuscript insists the true explanation is simpler. The temporal layers are converging. Past and future are bleeding into the present, and the result is an increase in experiences where linear causality breaks down and the cyclical nature of time becomes visible. The third sign is the rise of memory, specifically memories that do not belong to the individual experiencing them. Therapists report a surge in clients describing past life memories, ancestral memories, or memories of places they have never visited and eras they have never lived in. Genetic researchers propose theories about epigenetic inheritance, suggesting that trauma and experience can be encoded in DNA and passed to descendants. But the manuscript traces these memories further back. They are, it claims, the implanted memories placed by the Watchers into Cain's line, now activating across the population. The descendants of Cain are far more numerous than anyone realizes. The lineage has been hidden, diluted and forgotten, but the genetic and spiritual markers remain. And as the return approaches, those markers awaken, flooding individuals with knowledge and experiences that are not their own. The fourth sign involves the throne. The manuscript states that in the time before the return, the heir will appear. This is not a messianic figure in the traditional sense. The heir is not coming to save the world, but to bridge it, to sit on the throne that has been empty since Lamech's time, to anchor the vibrational field that will allow the third and fourth creations to coexist. The manuscript does not provide identifying details. It does not name the heir or specify when they will appear, but it describes the process. The heir will be drawn to the manuscript through dreams, will study it intensely, will take the oath of guardianship, will learn fragments of the first tongue, and will eventually feel the pull of the throne. When they sit, the oracle claims, the veiling will rupture and the return will be complete. Guardians are actively watching for the heir. They share information through encrypted networks, looking for individuals who exhibit the markers, sudden fluency in languages they never studied, visions of Nod, ability to perceive the shifting text of the manuscript, a sense of double existence, and a restlessness that cannot be satisfied by ordinary life. The manuscript warns that the heir may not know who they are. They may live an ordinary life, unaware of the destiny pressing upon them. But the dreams will come. The manuscript will find them. And when the time is right, they will take their place. The fifth sign is conflict. The manuscript predicts that the return will not be welcomed by everyone. There are forces, both human and non-human, that benefit from the current structure, from the separation of the creations, from the veiling. These forces will resist the return with everything they have. The manuscript describes this as a war of perception, a battle not fought with weapons but with narratives, with belief systems, with control over attention and consciousness. Those who resist the return will label the manuscript and its guardians as dangerous, heretical, or insane. They will use institutional power, religious authority, social pressure, and psychological manipulation to suppress the knowledge. The manuscript advises guardians to expect opposition, to prepare for misunderstanding, and to remain firm in their commitment despite the cost. But the manuscript also offers encouragement. It reminds guardians that they are not alone, that the network spans centuries and continents, but others are waking up to the same truths. It describes the current moment as a time of preparation, a final period before the convergence when the scattered guardians will recognize each other and unite. The manuscript promises that when the convergence occurs, those who have been faithful to the study, who have borne the burden of the double life, who have protected the text and its knowledge, will stand together. They will not be swept away by the chaos. They will be anchors, guides for those who are disoriented, interpreters for those who are seeing the hidden kingdom for the first time. The chapter ends with a direct address to the reader. The manuscript asks, "Do you see the signs? Have you experienced the synchronicities, the strange memories, the dreams of places you have never been? Have you felt the pull toward knowledge that others dismiss? Have you sensed that reality is thinner than it appears, that something is waiting just beyond the surface?" If the answer is yes, the manuscript declares, you are already part of the return. You are already a guardian, whether you have taken the oath formally or not. The convergence is not something happening to you, it is something happening through you. And your choices in this moment, your willingness to engage with the manuscript, your courage to question and explore, will shape how the return unfolds. Like this video if you recognize the signs in your own life. Comment below with experiences of synchronicity or unexplained memory. Share with anyone who senses that something profound is shifting in the world. Subscribe for the final chapter, where we will explore what happens when the veil lifts completely and the hidden kingdom returns. We are at the threshold now, and what comes next will determine everything. Chapter 17. What happens when the veil lifts? The return of Nod is not an event. It is a process, a gradual thinning of the veiling, until the hidden kingdom becomes fully visible to those prepared to see it. The manuscript of Nod describes this final convergence as both terrifying and glorious, a moment when the illusions that have structured human existence for millennia dissolve and reality reveals itself in its full complexity. The manuscript does not predict when this will happen. It only insists that it is approaching, that the signs are multiplying, that the time of separation is ending, and it outlines what to expect when the veil lifts completely. The first thing that happens when the veil lifts is perception shifts. People will begin to see things that were always there but previously invisible. The manuscript describes this as the opening of the inner eye, a sudden expansion of awareness that allows the fourth creation's inhabitants to perceive the third creation's remnants. Buildings will appear in empty spaces, structures that exist in Nod but overlap with our geography. Beings will become visible, watchers who have been walking among humanity unnoticed, observing, guiding, waiting. The sky itself will change, showing layers and colors that the physical eye alone cannot detect. For those unprepared, this shift will be overwhelming, inducing fear, confusion, even madness. For those who have studied the manuscript, who have trained their perception through dreams and meditation, the shift will be a confirmation, a recognition of what they have always sensed. The second thing that happens is knowledge floods in. The implanted memories, dormant in the descendants of Cain, will activate fully. Millions of people will suddenly remember lives they did not live, civilizations they did not belong to, languages they never learned. They will wake up with skills and insights that appeared overnight. The manuscript describes this as the Great Remembering, a collective awakening where humanity reclaims its connection to the third creation. This influx of knowledge will accelerate technological and spiritual development beyond anything history has seen. But it will also destabilize societies as individuals struggle to integrate memories and identities that conflict with their previous sense of self. The third thing that happens is the throne activates. Somewhere in the world, the air will take their place on the empty throne, and the vibrational field that has been dormant since Lamech will ignite. The manuscript describes this moment as the re-anchoring, when the bridge between the creations is re-established at the highest level. The one who sits on the throne will perceive all layers of reality simultaneously, will speak with the authority of both the Watchers and humanity, will mediate between the old creation and the new. This person will not be a king in the political sense. They will be a custodian, a steward, a living connection point, and their presence will stabilize the convergence, preventing it from collapsing into chaos. The fourth thing that happens is conflict intensifies. Not everyone will welcome the return. The manuscript predicts 3 responses. The first response will be acceptance. Those who recognize the return as the fulfillment of ancient promises and embrace the expanded reality. These will be the guardians, the descendants of Cain who have been preparing, the mystics and seekers who have longed for this moment. The second response will be resistance. Those who view the return as a threat to the established order, who fear the loss of control, who prefer the clarity of separation to the complexity of convergence. These will mobilize religious, political, and social institutions to suppress the knowledge, to discredit the guardians, to maintain the veiling even as it crumbles. The third response will be confusion. The vast majority of humanity who simply do not know what is happening, who are caught between acceptance and resistance, seeking guidance and finding conflicting answers. The conflict will not be military in the traditional sense. The manuscript describes it as a war of narratives, a battle over which interpretation of reality will prevail. The resistors will claim that the return is demonic deception, a falling away from faith, a sign of the end times in the apocalyptic sense. The acceptors will claim that the return is the restoration of what was always meant to be, the healing of the wound inflicted by the veiling, the beginning of a new era where heaven and earth are no longer separate. The confused will oscillate between these positions, swayed by fear and hope in turn. And in the midst of this conflict, the guardians will work to preserve stability, to guide those who are disoriented, to explain what is happening to those who can hear. The fifth thing that happens is unity emerges. The manuscript promises that after the initial chaos, a new order will establish itself. Those who accept the return will form communities that integrate the knowledge of the third creation with the life of the fourth. These communities will practice the first tongue, not to dominate reality, but to collaborate with it, shaping their environments in harmony with the vibrational structure of existence. They will build cities that blend the physical and the spiritual, education systems that teach both history and prehistory, governance structures that honor both human and watcher wisdom. The manuscript described these communities as the new Nod, not a recreation of the old hidden kingdom, but a fusion, a place where the exiled and the native dwell together. The sixth thing that happens is, the name is revealed. The manuscript claims that when the convergence is complete, the name on the last page will be spoken openly, not by one individual, but by the collective. Humanity as a whole will learn to resonate with the frequency the name represents, and in that resonance, the final separation will dissolve. The distinction between creator and created will blur, not in the sense that humanity becomes God, but in the sense that humanity recognizes itself as an expression of God's consciousness, a unique and individuated voice in the eternal symphony. This recognition will transform everything: relationships, governance, creativity, spirituality, purpose. The manuscript describes it as the 8th day, the day that follows the completion of the biblical 7, the day when creation reaches its intended fulfillment. But the manuscript also issues a final warning. The return is not inevitable. It is possible. The veiling can be reinforced. The convergence can be aborted. If humanity collectively chooses fear over curiosity, separation over unity, control over collaboration, the return will stall. The third creation will remain hidden. The fourth creation will continue in isolation, and the cycle of separation will extend for another age. The manuscript does not predict which outcome will occur. It only insists that the choice is being made now, in this generation, through the decisions of individuals who are being called to engage with the hidden knowledge. Every person who studies the manuscript, who takes the oath, who learns the first tongue, who opens themselves to the possibility of the return, is casting a vote for convergence, and every person who dismisses, suppresses, or fears the manuscript is casting a vote for continued separation. The manuscript ends with a benediction. It blesses the reader, thanking them for engaging with the text, for bearing the burden of this knowledge, for being willing to question and explore. It promises that whether the reader becomes a guardian formally or not, they are now changed. They have seen the patterns. They have glimpsed Nod. They have heard the whisper of the first tongue. And that cannot be undone. The manuscript encourages the reader to trust the process, to follow the dreams, to speak the truths they are ready to speak, and to remain open to the guidance that will come. It promises that the return is not something distant. It is already here, unfolding in moments like this one, when consciousness expands and perceives the larger reality. And the manuscript closes with one final question: what will you do now that you know?